Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 501. Inside the dark rocky space. KWA thud. An elongated arm pierced through the rock and entered. The rock mass quickly repaired the broken part to block it, but it was no use. Bang! Another arm broke the rock that was being repaired. White hair fluttered as it entered the rock. Ah, let's go in. Even though it was unlikely to understand the words, Son Goku continued to grumble. He waved his Rui Jingu Bang and looked at the black space that unfolded before his eyes. It was quite a large space. Inside Dallos, as he was a guy with a huge body, the space inside his body was by no means small either. Thud, he struck the Rui Jingu Bang on the floor. He looked beyond the dark cave with his blazing eyes. Clank, clank, he walked through the cave. The flames emitted from his eyes brightly illuminated the surroundings. At the end of the connected cave. You're really hiding well. Son Goku's eyes saw a small and bizarre figure. A doll with a human head and a face with its eyes, nose, and mouth all twisted out of shape. The doll looked like it was made of stone or iron. That guy was Dallos. Everything he had seen from the outside was just a giant shell to hide that guy. Clank. Son Goku walked towards Dallos. This was the second time he had met the guy. Thinking back to that time, his fighting spirit surged, and his grip on the Rui Jingu Bang tightened. Creak. The guy was made of a rock harder than steel. He was the only one who could see the guy properly with his fire eyes truth. His other colleagues, even Odin, couldn't see Dallos properly and would throw Gingnur at the illusion he had created around him. Because of that, Son Goku had lost half of his Rui Jingu Bang in his fight with Dallos back then. It's different now. Clank. Son Goku walked towards Dallos. Creak, creak. Dallos looked at Son Goku with a rusty rattling sound. I fought you once before. Boom. The Rui Jingu Bang elongated as he swung it. Thwack. The Rui Jingu Bang struck Dallos on the head. Dallos's head was half bent sideways and he staggered. This time, I can fight better. Waruk. Son Goku's eyes were torn long and wide. It wasn't just stubbornness that made him insist on fighting one-on-one. He had lost many colleagues in his fight with the guy. With the help of his colleagues who couldn't even see the guy's true form, Son Goku had somehow managed to crush Dallos's heart. It was a half-hearted victory. Swoosh. Son Goku's body returned behind Dallos. Creak. Dallos turned his head, which had been bent sideways by the Rui Jingu Bang, back into place. Son Goku brought his fist towards Dallos's chest. That guy. Thud. His fist lightly touched. Was he like this? 100-step divine fist. Thwack. KWA thud. KWA thud. KWA thud. Dallos's body, which had flown and crashed into the wall, split apart. The giant cave shook and rumbled as if an earthquake had struck. 100-step divine fist. It was the ultimate technique of Shaolin and was once used by the Tathagata who had possessed Son Goku's body. Oh, it works. It works. He spread it out with his hands and showed it off, then Son Goku spun his arms around in excitement. He had practiced it a few times when he fought Hercules, but it was a different kind of fun to succeed in actual combat. Of course, if the Tathagata had seen this sight alive, he might have jumped up and down in resentment. What are you doing, Boulder? Towards Son Goku, who was cracking his fingers. Aren't you going to attack? Grunt. Dallos, who had raised his head, quickly rushed in. Thud. Thud. Goo. The sound of the earth vibrating continued. Screams and shouts were mixed together, and the smell of blood stung his nose. Asgard. For Asgard. Asgard. The Gildan nation founded by Odin. Countless rankers were fighting for it. How long do I have to wait? Odin thought as he crushed the incoming outers with his fists. This fight was too much for Asgard alone. He needed more comrades. They had to join forces like they did on the Day of Unity, when they fought against Shub-Niggurath. KWA rung. It was then. A golden lightning bolt crossed the battlefield. The outers turned black, burned to ashes, and scattered on the floor. Zeus. Jebek. Odin turned his head and saw a muscular giant of a man. Golden and black hair and golden eyes. A high ranker who had struck down lightning from afar. It was Hercules. That can't be right. Zeus had disappeared from the rankings. It wasn't an incomprehensible situation. He had known for a long time that he was in danger. It was unfortunate, because there was no one who could show as much presence on such a large battlefield as Zeus. He had enough magic power to fold even Odin, and the thunderbolts he cast from the sky boasted a range wide enough to cover this entire battlefield. On the other hand, Hercules had obtained a thunderbolt, but he was more specialized in hand-to-hand combat than Zeus. Aren't you looking too much over there, Jebek? The path that Hercules had carved out. There were groups walking down that path. The man at the forefront was quite familiar. A man wearing a red dragon robe and leading numerous warriors. Cheonmujin. The warriors, including the Cheonma Divine Church, set foot on the battlefield. It was the support of the Muram of guilds, which had now entered the ranks of large guilds. There aren't many people, rankers and below won't be of much help on a battlefield like this. Well done, I'm grateful that you came. Odin reached out and shook hands with Cheonmujin. As he did so, he looked at the faces of the warriors who had come with him. The rankers of the Muram Guild. Most of them were the leaders of the factions that led each faction in Muram. Cheonma is definitely a great asset. Muram consisted of many rankers, but there were few who were top-notch. However, Cheonmujin was a high ranker whose skills were far removed from Muram to begin with. Because of that, even though he had hardly been active, his ranking was slightly higher than Brunhilde's. Of course, the opponent was not easy enough for the situation to be reversed with the help of Cheonmujin. I brought a good friend. He said he wouldn't make the same mistake as before. Warrior. A hot heat could be felt from afar. The presence that had felt small quickly grew in size. It was a feeling that I had felt before, and it was quite familiar. I received a disciple who was too old in my later years. Surtur. Surtur came to mind for a moment. I thought I had forgotten, but I guess I hadn't. Fortunately, the illusion didn't last long. Warrior. Flames soared high into the sky. And between those flames, two horns appeared. Is it Diablo? It was confusing. Surtur was born a giant and became a devil. And since he also used flames, Diablo looked just like Surtur. Ha ha ha, finally, today has come. Today, a devil with a gigantic body like a giant raises a red sword high into the sky and leaps onto the battlefield. The sword wrapped in flames cut and burned the outers. A sword, it was a style that didn't go well with Diablo, who always fought with nothing but his bare body. I taught him the sword. The sword, you mean you? I considered the sword to be a simple item. I let him know that it wasn't. Wah-ak! Diablo ran through the battlefield, wielding a flaming sword. Cheonmujin smiled faintly as he watched him. That's all I did. Cheonmujin said as if it was nothing, but Odin didn't think so. A change in perception can be more difficult than any kind of learning. And that was even more so for Diablo, who had lived for thousands of years. However, Cheonmujin completely changed Diablo's perception in just 1 year. Perhaps, in order to do that, Cheonmujin taught him the joy of the sword and proved it with his skills. In addition, the news Cheonmujin brought was not just for Diablo. Everyone is gathering here, everyone, the heavenly realm, Veda, Ragnarok, the Zodiac, the Demon King, and the sky. Guilds began to be mentioned from Cheonmujin's mouth. From large guilds to mid-sized guilds. And even small and medium-sized guilds that were not well known. All of them are coming here. Muram was just the first to arrive. The tower was moving. Qua-aat. Diablo's wielded sword cut off the outer's tentacles. Then he immediately turned his body and swung it several times. Ki-it. It felt different from when he swung his fist. Diablo's eyes lit up at the tingling sensation he felt at his fingertips. For today, he had learned martial arts, which he had not even been interested in for the past year. Is there no one decent? Diablo was not inferior to Sun Ogong when it came to being obsessed with fighting. Naturally, his interest turned to Dalos, who was fighting Sun Ogong far away. Thud, his steps naturally headed in that direction. And then, I don't think you need to go that way. A voice stopped Diablo's steps. Growl. Diablo, who had already completed his demonization since his appearance, turned his head with a beastly growl. There was Hercules, dragging the lizard-like tail of an outer in one hand. Why, that monkey won't like it very much. The Sun Ogong that Hercules knew hated it when someone interfered in his fight. It was probably the same this time. Perhaps Diablo's intervention could lead to a clash between Sun Ogong and Diablo. Do I have to care about that? Diablo snorted and looked at Dallos. In his eyes, Dallos looked like a giant angel with wings made of rock. I have to fight that guy. 1 year ago, that day. Diablo felt a sense of powerlessness in that day's battle that he had never felt before. Shub-Niggurath, an existence that felt like it was impossible to reach. In order to aim for her, Diablo swallowed his pride and went to the Church of the Heavenly Demon and learned how to use a sword from Xian Mu-Jin, which he was not familiar with. That was why he had to fight the strongest opponent on this battlefield. That guy is the strongest here. As he was saying that, Diablo looked up at the sky. The purple sky. Outside the tower, the color changed with the appearance of the outers. Diablo looked up at the sky that now completely covered the 63rd floor and the corners of his mouth turned up. Yeah, that's it. What do you mean that's it? Contrary to expectations, Diablo backed down too easily. Hercules, who felt a greater sense of unease at that reaction, frowned and looked at him. As expected, I have to fight that guy. Kujik. The ground that Diablo was standing on sank down. Kwang. He stomped on the ground with all his might and jumped high into the purple sky. And Hercules was taken aback by Diablo's sudden actions. That ignorant lizard bastard. Bang. After hesitating for a moment, he seemed to make up his mind and jumped up after Diablo. About a month ago, a story from a meal with Yuan and Sun Ogong came to mind. What's in that sky? Thud. Sun Ogong dropped the piece of meat he was holding, looking flustered. That was the first time Hercules had seen Sun Ogong react with such surprise. Chapter 502. What the hell is in the sky? Thud. Sun Ogong dropped the meat he was holding in his hand. He briefly rubbed his eyes and picked up the sand-covered meat again. He heard a crunch as he chewed the meat with the sand. Heracles glanced around the garden, observing their expressions. He wasn't as surprised as Sun Ogong, but his eyes were still shaking. Why, I don't think it's just a change of color. There must be a reason. Yuan and Sun Ogong hesitated. Neither of them answered. The silence that followed was suffocating, and Heracles urged them on. Don't you know? We're not sure. Then why? I don't think you should know yet. As if he had made up his mind, Yuan nodded and continued. You shouldn't give up like we did if you find out for no reason. Give up? Heracles' eyebrows twitched for a moment. He was about to ask how that was possible when Heracles' eyes fell on Sun Ogong. His hands were trembling. He, who had never been afraid of anyone, was terrified. What on earth could scare him so much? At that moment, his curiosity grew. Why are we here? Heracles realized it when Yuan asked. Don't be curious, don't look for it. Never. The two of them had given up on the future and chosen this place because they had given up on winning. Whoosh. That day, Heracles looked up at the peaceful night sky. The stars twinkled in the sky as if they were about to fall down at any moment. Is that up there? Since Shub-Niggurath is dead, there are only 3 guys we should be wary of. Yuan, who had stopped eating, said, holding up 3 fingers. As I said earlier, the first one is obviously the sky. Never. Don't even think about it. Be careful. What's next? The foolish chaos. But I don't think this guy will be much of a threat even if we encounter him. He's a careful guy, so he doesn't use his power very well. Then that. Oh, I've met him. Heracles nodded. Yuan had used the foolish chaos to fight Shub-Niggurath. Heracles had encountered him outside Yuan's quarters when Yuan had signaled for a riot in the arena and the foolish chaos had come to Yuan's quarters. Then I only have to be careful of one more. Who is it? We don't know his real name, so we can't tell you. Instead, we only know a few of his names. As if it wasn't easy to say his name, Yuan took a deep breath and began to list his names one by one. The unnamed vastness. An indescribable being. The nameless fog. Only 3 names. This guy isn't the strongest, but he's the most dangerous. What do you mean? He's killed the most people. By this fog guy. If the wall ever collapses and that fog appears outside. If you see a thick fog under the purple sky, run away first. The first thing to do was to run away. The person who commanded and led the Guild Alliance in the fight against Shub-Niggurath was Irang Jun. He was one of the oldest high rankers in history, along with Odin, among the active rankers. No one was more qualified than Irang Jun, both in terms of seniority and as a commander leading an army. Click, click, the heavenly army moved behind Irang Jun. That wasn't all. Heaven and Diva, who had taken over command together. And even Olympus. Thousands of rankers followed him to the battlefield in Asgard. Strange. Uran stepped forward. The Guild Alliance that was rushing to Asgard stopped moving. Why is that? asked Michael, who was following him. Isn't it strange? Swish. A misty fog surrounded them. It wasn't an ordinary natural phenomenon. Iran pulled out his Unnuetdeo. Ooh, magic power gathered at the tip of the spear. Iran's Unnuetdeo drew a curve. It seemed like several changes were being drawn at the tip of the spear, but soon it became a sharp, long line that stretched forward. Clang, crash. The Unnuetdeo that swung in front of him cut the fog in half along with the ground. Creak. The ground that was split in two as if a natural disaster had occurred. Iran was once the general who led the heavens as the enemy of the heavenly great saint. The rankers from various guilds who followed him were amazed at the skill he showed. As expected, it wasn't false that he was on par with the heavenly great saint. Hey, when did he become an enemy? Check the ranking now. Well, arguments and rebuttals began over Iran's abilities. However, those who had reached a certain level of attainment were not very interested in Iran's blow. Instead, they began to focus on the fog that appeared before them. Strange. Yes, it wouldn't be strange if it was cut at this point. Michael, who led the sky, and Athena, who led the rankers as the representative of Olympus. The two saw Iran swing his Unnuetdeo precisely at the fog. However, even though it was split in two, the fog didn't even move a little. Suck. Iran looked at his face reflected in the Unnuetdeo. He was confident that he could cut anything he wanted to cut. Whether it was fire, water, or a high mountain. But he couldn't even cut a single fog. It hadn't even been a minute since he noticed the strange feeling. I've been going around the same place. Are you talking about us? Since when? Confused faces. But when it came to seriousness, Iran was the most serious. Unlike others, he had been in this fog for a long time. Since when? What do you mean? Iran laughed in vain at the thought. I wondered why everyone didn't find it strange. I don't know either. Now that I think about it, I don't know when it started. I don't know how long it's been. What? I've been walking here for more than half a day. Half a day? That's nonsense. They were speechless in surprise. But in this situation, Iran couldn't have lied, and the others were slowly feeling the strange feeling. Why don't we just get out of here? The true nature of the fog began to appear. The water vapor in the fog gathered to form a blurry shape. Thousands of rankers led by Iran tensed up at the appearance of something that could be a human or a ghost. There is no hidden enemy. A voice was heard. The direction of the sound could not be known. Whether it was through the ghost that appeared before him, or from a completely different direction. You just couldn't see it. Yes, that must be it. Clack. As if to say that long words were unnecessary, Iran got ITUNNGUYETDAO in his hand. The other rankers were the same. With so many of them, they couldn't waste any more time here just because a single guy was blocking their way. If you block our way, we'll break through. Are you trying to stop all of us alone? Wung, woo, jingle. Thousands of rankers gathered their magic power at once. The world trembled and the surrounding fog distorted. Despite being clearly superior in numbers, Orangjangunwasunable Terestashard. Shub Nigarath. The battle against the 1,000 goat Shishi had commanded. Back then, the tower had moved to block a single existence. Outer godswariesic existences. Beyond common sense. Incomprehensible existences. And so, we haven't never tried to block an enemy before. And it was Thessam at this time. You should have said, me, not us. What? Swish. Orangjangun hurriedly looked around. He could no longer feel the mana of the rankers that had been present just moments before. Before he knew it, Orangjangun was standing alone. The many rankers that had been around him were nowhere to be seen. What did you do? I am the nameless fog. An unnamed vastness, and at the same time, an indescribable existence. Screech. The fog scattered and swirled like a typhoon. It was only then that Orangjangun was able to tell the direction from which the voice was coming. The entire fog. Before they knew it, they had entered inside it. At any moment, this fog could turn into countless swords and spears that would come for his neck. You will never be able to fight together. You are all individuals. Screech. The gathered fog wrapped around Orangjangun's body. Orangjangun brandished the annual blade in his hand and hurriedly scattered the fog. Boom. A storm-like wind created by the annual blade. Tens of thousands of spearheads pushed the fog away. For the time being, he had used this technique because his first thought was to get out of there. However, screech. The power released by the annual blade quickly dissipated with a sound like air escaping from a balloon. Quote! Orangjangun's eyes widened as if they were about to burst. Rumble. The fog tightened around his body. He had no other way to resist, having just swung the annual blade with all his might. Don't worry, A voice mixed with laughter. Soon, Orangutan's vision was completely blocked and his body was completely enveloped in a purple fog. The others will meet you in the same place. It was strange. The voice that had been so relaxed just a moment ago sounded a little shaky. The fog surrounding Orangutan's body also shook strangely. What had happened? Who are you? The moment that question was asked. I've lived for over 10,000 years, but this is the first time I've seen anything like this. It was not the voice of the nameless fog, but another welcome voice that reached Orangutan's ears. Thud, screech. The youngest told me about this first. I guess there's always something new to learn, no matter how long you live. Someone walked in, scattering the purple fog with their hand. His face was not visible due to the thick fog, but Orangutan was certain who he was. The day has come when I would receive your help. I thought this day would come sooner or later. A tall man entered, holding a hunchun cudgel in one hand and scattering the fog with the other. A high ranker with the title that meant he would pacify the heavens. Wang, the great sage, equal to heaven. He had entered the fog of his own accord. Now you owe me one, Orangutan. Of course, I'll make sure to pay you back with interest. Forget the interest, just treat me to some good alcohol from the celestial realm. Haha, I will. The corners of Orangutan's mouth turned up. In a situation like this, there was no ally as reliable as Wang. Then first, I guess I should get rid of this annoying fog. Thud, Wang slammed the hunchun cudgel he was holding into the ground. Rumble, a vibration spread out from the ground where the hunchun cudgel had been planted. Wang is also known as the king of great strength. Along with the flow of the vibration, the surrounding fog began to gradually dissipate. He is the greatest shaman in this tower. Chapter 503. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The ground where the demon king stood shook. At the same time, the fog began to slowly dissipate. The sorcery he had created gradually seeped into the ground, taking control of the atmosphere. Crack, veins popped out on the demon king's forehead. Blood vessels also protruded from his hand, which was grip. The law of nature conclude I earned it the black iron cudgel. Magic power vibrated the atmosphere. The fog that enveloped the demon king and the Yilangjan army swirled violently, as if it would not easily retreat. 1. Stubborn bastard. Thud, thud, thud. The black iron cudgel slammed into the ground in succession. Why can't you just hand it over? Screech. The fog that had been obscuring the atmosphere grew dim, and the surrounding landscape began to return. What the hell? They had all disappeared for sure. The rankers who had disappeared reappeared. Michael and Athena, who had been leading the soldiers, also had bewildered expressions on their faces. You found it. The voice of the nameless fog. The demon king looked beyond the fog. Yilangjan felt that the demon king, who was standing side by side with him, was seeing something different. What's going on? My little brother's eyes are so good that we ended up resembling each other in that regard. Pat, Pat, the demon king said so and pointed to his eyes. The brother, the demon king was referring to meant the great saint of the heavenly path. Naturally, the eyes meant the skill Wan Jiamjung, which was like the great saint of the heavenly path symbol. I saw it from above. The demon king looked up. This isn't just fog. Then, it's alive, this thing. The nameless fog said. It said that it was a nameless fog and, at the same time, an unnamed vastness and an indescribable existence. Normal attacks won't work. Boom. The black iron cudgel thrust towards the fog from the demon king's fingertips. Quazazazaza, cheesy-zazaz. The tip of the black iron cudgel pierced the fog and scattered black energy in all directions. Ah, as if blocked by something, the black iron cudgel could not pierce the fog and was blocked in the middle. And with that, the demon king narrowed his eyes at the scream that erupted. What's important is the essence. Essence. When I saw it from above. Tang, the black iron cudgel bounced off. Feeling a tingling sensation on his fingertips, the Monkey King looked at the enormous existence surrounding him. Even from up there, it's so enormous that it can't be fully absorbed, and it's embracing everything here. He frowned and rubbed his throbbing wrist. Fortunately, this was enough to confirm it, just in case. The nameless fog, with unnamed greatness, is an indescribable existence. Its true nature was captured by the Monkey King's magic. We're not fighting this thing that looks like fog. Nevertheless, the Monkey King told everyone. The indescribable, enormous monster that he saw from above was likely the true nature of the opponent they were fighting. So don't be fooled and listen carefully. He had captured the intangible fog. There was only one thing left to do now. And fight. All that was left was to fight with their lives on the line. Sun Wukong, who was drunk one day, once said. I went there, really? Where? Up in the sky. It was a place where the stars twinkled and my body floated in the sky even if I didn't exert any strength. Sun Wukong had been to the sky. That day, Sun Wukong excitedly talked about the sky, or rather, space, with his limited vocabulary. He said it was incredibly vast. He said that this tower was like a speck of dust compared to space. He kept saying things that didn't make sense. In the end, Hercules asked as if he couldn't listen anymore. Then why didn't you go all the way there? If that space is really bigger and wider than this tower, there's no way you would have just come back, given your personality. I tried to go there. But, I definitely thought I went all the way to the end, but... He scratched his head as if he didn't know what to say. I ended up back here. Here, the end of the star that I thought I had reached was here again. Thud, thud, as he spoke, Sun Wukong tapped his foot on the ground a few times. He thought he had gone far, very far away, but the place he arrived at was the place where he had started. I don't know if I ran in place or if I ran in a circle towards the starting point. I don't know which one it is. If that's true, I'd like to go there someday. As he listened, he became curious. Beyond the sky that he was seeing with his own eyes. The place that Sun Wukong had supposedly visited, I wonder what kind of place it was. That place called the universe. That day, Heracles made a promise to himself. Someday when this fight is over, and if I manage to survive that fight, I will definitely visit the place that Sun Wukong mentioned. However, I never thought I'd come here today. Heracles couldn't properly follow behind Diablo. He didn't have the ability to ride on clouds like Zeus. The lightning he wielded was specialized only in delivering powerful shocks. Of course, compared to Diablo, who had wings that allowed him to fly, his mobility was lacking. As Heracles jumped up with all his might, he was suddenly filled with an inexplicable sense of unease. The sky was getting closer. He must have broken through the clouds and climbed much higher a long time ago. Despite that, Diablo was nowhere to be seen. And the something in the purple sky that Wu Wen and Sun Wukong had mentioned was also nowhere to be found. The unease turned into fear, and once again into hesitation. Can I really go any closer to that place? Can I ignore the warnings of the two people who have seen and experienced more than me? But, damn it, clack, his teeth gnashed. That damn lizard bastard. He couldn't just pass by after all. Was it because he had spent so long with Sun Wukong? Heracles' nature may not have changed, but his mouth had become a bit rougher than before. If Diablo hadn't recklessly charged out like that, he wouldn't have followed him this far. Thud, zap, he kicked off the empty air once more. A great shock rippled through the atmosphere as if an earthquake had occurred, and Heracles shot up like a missile. Thwack, the sky after passing through all the clouds. He couldn't tell how far he had to climb. As he continued on, he began to have the baseless thought that he might end up climbing to the next level. Zong, with a small shock like that of a glass pane shattering, the world Heracles was seeing changed. Wah, gravity disappeared and his breath caught in his throat. A disgusting and stifling aura flowed down his throat along with his breath. A space filled with stars, resembling the universe. However, there was one thing different from what Sun Wukong had told him. It's not pitch black, countless stars floating in the pitch black darkness. That's what I heard, but the universe that Hercules reached was untainted. A purple universe. As Hercules was gazing at that world as if entranced, Diablo's back appeared before his eyes. You've come quite far. If I turn around here, it seems like I'll get a good tongue lashing. Hercules approached Diablo. Let's go. You'll know once you see it, but this is a place you shouldn't come to. In the purple universe, Hercules was in a hurry to escape this ominous place. It wasn't just because of the warnings from Yu Wen and Son Goku. He had a bad feeling. It felt like he shouldn't stay here any longer. That's why he was in a hurry to take Diablo and go back. Diablo. Strangely, Diablo didn't respond to Hercules' words. Tremble, tremble. Diablo's shoulders, which were turned away, could be seen shaking. Trembling. None other than Diablo. He was a guy who would accept even death with a smile. He always enjoyed fighting, putting himself closest to death. That Diablo was trembling in fear. Just what did he see? Heracles. Diablo's voice couldn't continue. From his reaction, it seemed like he knew that Hercules was behind him. Why are you acting like this, really? Something was hidden behind Diablo's huge back. The moment Hercules tried to look past Diablo's body. Bam, you can't see it. Diablo stretched out his hand and blocked Hercules. Diablo's behavior and Son Goku's appearance overlapped. The moment, above the sky, was mentioned, Son Goku was so flustered that he dropped the meat he was holding. Just what did they see to react like this? Whoosh! A bright red flame rose from Diablo's body. It was a fighting spirit that had overcome his fear. He blocked Hercules' view and opened his mouth. You go back. Are you trying to die? It's better than running away. Hercules clicked his tongue. It seemed like the problem started when he tried to persuade this guy to go back in the first place. Diablo, the king of demons. In terms of pride, his ranking might be first in the tower. For such a person, there was no way he could choose to run away. I have no choice. And so did Heracles. Get out of the way for a bit. He wasn't a great man who would abandon someone and run away. 2 is better than 1, right? No need. Get lost. I'm not a lackey of the devil race who listens to your orders. Smack. Heracles' hand pushed Diablo's body away. Of course, I don't need your permission to fight, and I don't intend to. Don't get in the way. Diablo tried to resist in his own way, but it was useless. Diablo, who was already trembling in fear, was forcibly pushed aside by Heracles' strength. Heracles secured his vision like that. The sight that Diablo had been looking at entered his vision. Quote. Heracles' forehead creased, and a question mark appeared above his head. I thought there must be a great monster or something, but what entered his eyes wasn't a monster. What the hell is that? The first thought that came to mind was that there was no way to express it with a single word or phrase. It didn't seem like a living creature. It was connected by a beautiful, small light that was darker than purple. It was like a small representation of the stars in the universe. It was a group of stars rather than a living creature. It most closely resembled a nebula. And in the center, a door. There was a very small door that was hard to see if you didn't look closely. The door was wide open. If it had been Son Goku, he would have seen it right away, but Heracles couldn't. But just a little bit more. If he just focused a little bit more, he would be able to see it. I did it. Swish. At that moment, as if possessed by something, someone stepped in front of Heracles, who had been looking inside the door. Never. Don't even try to interfere. All he could see was the back of the person who had turned around, but there was no way he couldn't recognize them. Heracles was surprised for a different reason. Like he had said, the guy who had told him to never interfere had shown up here. Why are you here, Kim Yu-won? The guy he hadn't been able to contact because of what was going on had appeared in the sky. Chapter 504. Even at Hercules' voice, Yu-won didn't turn his body. Yu-won had said with his own mouth not to even bother with this place. And looking at the situation, the reason was probably beyond the door that Hercules was trying to look at. Nevertheless, Yu-won kept his eyes off of that place. Even so, I think I should take a look at it once. He even said that he came here to see beyond that door. Hercules made a strange expression. It was weird. It didn't make sense. To change his words like this after a month. Are you talking about that guy? Yeah. Yu-won nodded and turned his head. Hercules' body, whose eyes met his, shook. It was a strange feeling. An illusion, as if he was seeing two people through his eyes. Like when he saw the door in the purple nebula, Hercules felt like he was being sucked into those eyes. Is he not Kim Yu-won? As he looked into his eyes, he suddenly wondered. Is the Kim Yu-won in front of him really Kim Yu-won? He didn't look like a different person at all. Of course, that didn't mean he was the Yu-won that he usually knew. For now, you guys. Swish. Yu-won moved his hand. Go ahead. Where to? Whoosh. Hercules' words couldn't continue. Hercules and Diablo fell down as Yu-won's gesture. With a clang, the two quickly disappeared as they fell under the sky. He could hear Hercules and Diablo shouting something from afar. I told you not to come here, so why did you come? Yu-won didn't seem to care about that. Yu-won, who sent them down like that, turned his body again and looked at the purple nebula in front of him. Soon, Yu-won's gaze changed as he looked at it. The same went for his speech. Beyond the door, wide open in the middle of the nebula. Yu-won, who was looking there, opened his mouth. You are all in one and all. Wong. The nebula responded to the name that sounded like a spell. No. Wong, woo-woo, woo-wong, woo-woo. The vast sky, including the nebula. The sky itself, which symbolized the existence of the outer, began to ring loudly in response to Yu-won's words. You, who are nothing without existence, who wish for existence in the void, the greedy Sotheth. Sotheth. Sadness, reproach, regret, a voice with many complex emotions. The nebula answered Yu-won's call. Woo Wang, woo woo. Woo woo woo, he was doubting loudly. Also, he was laughing. He asked if he was really him. If he really was, would it be different this time? And as if laughing at the nebula's laughter, the look in Yuan's eyes, looking at the nebula, changed. I'm not the one you know. The faintness, longing, and sadness faded. As Azathoth, he didn't need all of those things for this fight, and they were only a hindrance. As they disappeared, only one thing remained in Yuan's eyes. A desire to win. Thanks to that, I'm convinced. The corner of Yuan's mouth went up. It was a good thing. It was worth the effort to come all the way here. I'll be right back. Swish. Yuan's figure gradually faded away. The nebula, which had been trembling greatly towards Yuan, and the Azathoth dwelling in his body, gradually lost its light. Blink. As if a giant eye was blinking. The light turned off and on, and a voice came out of it. Ah-za. As if in disbelief. No. As if he was confused about who he was. Th. Purple sky. The being named, Sotos, in the sky looked down again. It could have been Azathoth. Towards Yuan. Shua, Hercules and Diablo, who were thrown down by Yuan, fell underground. Hercules' gaze, which passed through several clouds as he fell, was always directed towards the sky. Clack, what the hell is he thinking? He couldn't move even if he tried to control his body. Something was pressing down on his body so strongly that he couldn't stop his falling body. Although he wanted to go back up as soon as possible. Quang. In the end, Hercules and Diablo fell underground. To where they originally were. In the middle of the battlefield of Outer and Asgard. What else fell from above? The deep and wide creator. The rankers standing on the battlefield stepped back in confusion as dust rose above it. Meanwhile, Hercules, who had fallen to the ground, felt a tingling shock in his legs. From how high had he fallen? Crayer. Ooh, Diablo still seemed out of his mind. It made sense. No matter how strong he was, he had been thrown from several kilometers in the sky, and with such force that Hercules couldn't even center himself properly, so his body couldn't be fine. Kim Yuan, that bastard. Diablo shook his head a few times and barely regained his senses. Hercules glanced at him and thought he was quite something. He had received such an impact but, let alone dying, he didn't even seem to have broken anything. What the hell happened? Hercules' eyes flashed at Diablo's mumble. Did you see it that way too? You can tell just by looking. How it's different. Certainly, Yuan's gaze and behavior seemed awkward. An alien feeling, as if he had become a different person. Hercules hurriedly looked up. But what did you see up there? The scene that still lingered in his head. Countless twinkling stars and the nebula of stars that encompassed them. And in the middle of that nebula, a single open door. That was all Hercules had seen. But it seemed that Diablo had seen inside it. I don't know. You saw it but you don't know. I forgot everything the moment I fell. I'm at a loss now. To think that I was so scared of something I don't even remember. Black smoke poured out of Diablo's mouth along with hollow laughter. It was the first time he had been scared in his life, but he didn't even remember who his opponent was. One thing's for sure, a sigh escaped his lips. Grasping tightly the sword that he hadn't let go of even while falling down from that high place, Diablo lamented. Kim Yuan, that guy must be dead. He said it with conviction. He didn't remember, but no, he didn't even recognize it. He didn't think Yuan would come back alive alone against that. But, dead, who? Between Diablo and Hercules, someone appeared like a ghost in the dust cloud that was slowly rising. Diablo's eyes widened at the sudden appearance of Yuan, and a beastly sound erupted from his mouth. Krrn. Diablo took a few steps back in surprise. Hercules didn't make a sound, but his eyes were just as surprised. Both above and here, how did he appear so silently? When did you come back? I just got here. Are you okay? Are you asking how I came back alive? Hercules nodded, his question hitting the nail on the head. In fact, he thought the same. He hadn't seen inside the door like Diablo, but the nebula of those giant stars he had seen from the sky seemed like an existence that was impossible to dare to oppose. I thought you'd think that. I sent you back just in case you tried to come back up. It was an action taken because he knew Hercules' personality well. If he asked, he would surely have fallen down and come back up again. He wasn't the kind of guy who would leave him alone in that dangerous place. So don't come up, and stay put here. Gung. A vibration that could be felt all the way down to the deep crater. At that vibration, Yuan muttered in a small voice. Dallos. His speech and gaze had changed. Hercules, who was looking at Yuan, was startled again. It was the gaze he had seen from above. Clearly, his face and voice were Yuan's, but in an instant, he had become a different person. You have many names. Hey, you, what the hell happened? As he asked, reaching out his hand, Hercules' pupils shook. Yuan's figure, which was gradually fading away. He disappeared from his seat once again. A purple mist covered the ground. The mist shook several times from the shock inflicted from the inside. Bang, cooing, quang, the rankers trapped in the mist resisted fiercely. The Demon King, who grabbed the entity of the mist with his magic. Michael, who wielded a sword wrapped in wind, and Athena, who spewed out Aegis, magic power. And thousands of rankers following them. Did they know? Kururung, that the mist that had trapped them was a single, enormous life form that was indescribably huge when seen from far and wide. Under the sky, a giant life form of a size that would be impossible to identify with the naked eye unless it was a satellite. Made of mist, it crouched with a head and tail like a dragon. Thud, and before the life form's eyes, a single person, as small as dust in comparison, approached. You've come too. Yuan looked at the giant mist. He remembered that it wasn't this big before. It seemed that the guy had eaten quite a few names as well. Goo, the unnamed enormity stretched out its arm. The mist surged towards Yuan like a giant wave. The giant mist wrapped around his body, and Yuan was swallowed into it just like the others. That moment, Puaik, the mist that had enveloped Yuan disappeared, and the front leg of the unnamed enormity was torn off and sent flying. The mist shook in dismay. Yuan, who had broken the mist with his hand, muttered as if he had expected it. Don't get any bigger, you're just as greedy as anyone else. Wriggle, a tone of voice as if he knew him well. More, the mist wriggled and the unnamed enormity looked down at Yuan. The life form, whose pupils were larger than mountains and about the size of a small country, moved its head, which was a huge threat in itself. Do you know me? The mist shook, signaling danger. Surely not, his heart conveyed through his voice. The unnamed mist, the unnamed enormity, and an indescribable existence. All those names were saying that there was no way that the human before him could know him. That it shouldn't be that way. It seems you don't believe me either. Nevertheless, screech, it's been a long time. Nyok the Sothith. With regret, Yuan drew his sword and pointed it at him. Nyok the Sothith, the names he had given to an unnamed mist. I've come to collect your name. Puaik, towards that name, Azathoth swung his sword. Chapter 505. It was a hazy, foggy day. Azathoth looked at the fog and thought, how far does this fog go? Azathoth asked as he followed Shub-Niggurath and Nyarlathotep. Shub-Niggurath, who now looked like a large mountain goat, and Nyarlathotep, who had shed his child's form, shook their heads. It felt like they had been walking for a long time, but the fog did not end. No matter how much they walked, they could not escape the fog. Azathoth realized the reason quite late. You were following me too. Another companion joined his aimless walk. It was strange. Starting with a goat, his group continued to grow. Now, even things that were neither human nor animal began to join him. Nyokta, Azathoth named the fog. In addition to that, nameless fog, Azathoth gave the fog another name. The nameless fog that had been following him since one day. At first, he thought it was not so bad to have him with him. He thought about that day. It was not a good memory. It seemed good at the time, but now it was the opposite. Was it because he had been betrayed once? Or was it because he was now Azathoth and Kim Yuan at the same time? Well, the formless chaos is imbued in the otherworld sword. Shuik, the tip of the sword split the head of the unnamed greatness in half. I guess it doesn't matter now. The name wrapped around the tip of the sword cut through the fog. The fog, which should not have been cut, was cut off like a felled tree and disappeared. The huge creature made of fog writhed in agony. Nyokta shouted in surprise. How? The sword Yuan wielded could not be described as simply sharp or powerful. As the fog was cut, the name was carved on the sword. No, it was taken away. Formless chaos. The power imbued in the sword devoured the name that Nyokta had. Are you really? You're asking the same thing again. Yuan answered without stopping his sword. Half of it is right. Half right. Are you running away? Formless chaos devours the nameless fog and transforms Anyog Sothoth into a cloud. Other rankers and high rankers surround Azathoth, but he is too powerful to approach. When King Uma approaches Azathoth and asks for his identity, Azathoth replies that he is Kim Yuan. King Uma is relieved to hear that Azathoth is heading to the battlefield. Formless chaos absorbs the nameless fog. Divine power has increased by 1. Swish, the name and power returning through the tip of the sword that had cut the fog. Half wrong, that can't be. Did Nyarlathotep not tell you anything? The fog shook as if it was moved by Yuwon's question. Nyarlathotep, if it was the foolish chaos, it must have noticed his existence to some extent. It seems like that guy still has a lot on his mind. What other tricks does he have up his sleeve? After obtaining Azathoth's power and memories, Yuwon came to know more about the foolish chaos. The fight in the future. And the fight in the present. And the past, from before the foolish chaos first gained a name to after. He might know the most about it out of anyone inside and outside of the tower. That guy, so Yuwon was certain. He's scheming something outside as well. Swish, Yuwon, who had been lightly swinging his sword, looked towards the center of the fog. It had been continuously making a rustling noise since earlier. It wasn't creating fragments, and cutting the fog little by little was starting to feel stuffy. Tisk, Yuwon clicked his tongue as if he didn't like something. My Hung and those guys too. They shouldn't have gotten involved. King Uma and the rankers who were trapped inside the fog. Most of them probably didn't even know when they got caught in the fog. Nameless fog, that was what Nyarlathotep was. It was so big that it couldn't be seen. That was the power of a being without a name. It was one of the powers of the name it possessed. Thanks to my Hung's spell, they weren't completely devoured. What if there was just one more person like Sun Ogong mixed in there? He didn't know, but the situation would have been quite different. It might have been difficult to defeat Nyarlathotep, but they would have been able to get out of the giant fog. Whoosh, the giant mass of fog started to move. From the looks of it, it just looked like fog being blown by the wind. But if you looked from a step back, no, if you looked from very far away, it looked like a cloud shaped like a giant dragon spreading its wings. Are you running away? Yuwon looked up and gazed at the purple fog that had become a cloud. The cloud dragon with its wings spread out looked somewhat precarious. One of its wings had been cut off, and half of its head was gone. Originally, the fog that had no definite form would have restored the severed parts, but it couldn't do that now. The place where the name had been carved out couldn't be filled by anything. It was as if its existence itself had disappeared. Soto Eo, Nyarlathotep flew up into the sky. The place he was headed to was the sky. Beyond the purple sky, there were giant nebulae and countless names. However, you're calling out a name that can't even be spoken out loud so pitifully. A small but clear voice rang out from above Nyarlathotep's head, who was flying up into the sky like that. Didn't you know that a day like today would come? Yuwon asked, standing on top of Nyarlathotep's head. Below, thousands of rankers, including Wu Ma Wang, were looking up. In their eyes, this giant fog would probably look like a giant black cloud covering the sky. Nyarlathotep had finally released them. It was to escape from Yuwon. However, thanks to that, Yuwon didn't have to swing his sword annoyingly to cut the names into pieces. You saved me some trouble. Should I thank you, or should I just take this as a win? Yuwon. No, Azathoth was standing on his head. Nyarlathotep gave up on escaping. He was like a small mouse in front of a dinosaur. He couldn't even think of fighting back, and his voice trembled. Grayat. Nyarlathotep's words stopped for a moment. He had been conscious of the sky for a moment, but soon, he succumbed to the fist that was right in front of him. My father, you're a disgusting bastard until the end. Yuwon cut him off as if he couldn't bear to listen any longer. If he listened any longer, he felt like he was going to vomit because of the nausea and disgust burning inside him. Who's your father? You're the one who was eaten by Sotheth first. Father, say one more word. Nyarlathotep couldn't say anything more at the growling voice. Yuwon never wanted to hear the word father from a guy like this. Names and such, I'll throw you into the abyss and make you suffer forever. He felt Nyarlathotep's lullaby. He definitely felt it. Something was different. It was strange. The being standing on the fog was definitely Azathoth. That was a fact that didn't need to be doubted. The name he possessed proved it. But why on earth did he feel like a completely different person? Would it make a difference if you begged for mercy and forgiveness? Would it be different if it wasn't me but Sototh standing in front of you? There was no need to say more. Nyarlathotep, this guy is really hopeless and disgusting. Swoosh, Yuwon's sword tip pointed upwards. Azathoth didn't handle the sword. He didn't have any items, not even a tool like a fly swatter. However, I'm Kim Yuwon. Yuwon, not Azathoth. He was more familiar with the sword than with his bare hands. I am. He wraps the formless chaos around his sword. And he imagined it in his head. the imagination of cutting the huge fog in front of him with a single sword. Kim Yuan, Kwa Kwang, a long black line drawn across Yuan's field of vision along the tip of the sword. Zap, the huge fog of Enyog Sothoth was cut along the line. With that, formless chaos, absorbs, nameless fog. Formless chaos, absorbs, unnamed enormity. Formless chaos. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. Divine power has increased by 10. Countless messages pop up. Yuan felt an immense amount of power surging inside him. In addition to the 3 names he knew, a few more names came to mind. As expected, he's quite a greedy bastard, judging by the fact that he had been steadily collecting other names after that. Foolish filled square. The fog, whose name had been taken away, barely squeezed out its voice. Filled square those filled square. PSSSSSs. The fog lost its strength and dissipated. There weren't many words that were heard properly. The fog that had lost its name was just fog, so it couldn't speak. Still, there was one thing that was definitely heard. Foolish Azathoth, whoosh. Enyog Sothoth, who had lost his name, became just a cloud. Yuan, who no longer needed to stand on it, thought as he fell down. It wasn't just Nyarlathotep who called me that. It seemed that the name had spread to many of the outer gods, including Nyarlathotep Thoth. Was it some kind of trend? Who's the one with the really stupid name? A snicker escaped his lips. The more he learned about what they called him behind his back, the more he looked forward to it. In any case, it wasn't difficult to make up his mind. In any case, Yuan had only one goal: to win this fight. And correcting the mistake Azathoth had made would ultimately lead to the same result. Thud, a circle formed around Yuan as he fell down. The rankers who had escaped from Nyogtha Sothoth's fog were wary of Yuan. Even the rankers he knew, like Michael and Aranjinguan, couldn't approach him easily. It wasn't because they couldn't tell friend from foe. It was because of the sight they had seen earlier, which was hard to believe even with their own eyes. Gulp, Aranjinguan's gaze flickered up. A black line was drawn across the sky. That single sword strike had cut through the fog that had trapped thousands of rankers and dozens of high rankers. Who the hell? Thud, one of the rankers who had spread out to avoid Yuan. The Horse King approached him. I'll just ask one thing. He looked at Yuan with calm eyes. Like Heracles and Diablo had felt. The Horse King was also seeing the two through Yuan's eyes. Who are you? Yuan's eyes lit up at the Horse King's question. He realized that the Horse King was seeing the two through him. Inwardly, he kept reminding himself that he was Kim Yuan. I need to be more careful. He chose one certainty over 2 uncertainties. Then he shouldn't waver. Yuan answered the Horse King's question. Kim Yuan. Is that so? His eyes returned. The Horse King smiled as if relieved. And then, in his usual voice, he asked, what do you plan to do now? Of course, it was an obvious question. Nyogtha Sothoth was finished. The fight had only just begun. I'm going to the battlefield. Chapter 506. There is no being without a name. Any being is bound to be called something. The name that refers to it. Expressions that describe it, all of those things are branches of a name. And if all of those things are ultimately derived from one name, what is that if not a god? The foolish chaos muttered so and rose into the sky. As if walking up an invisible staircase, he slowly reached the sky. The purple universe he arrived at. A collection of countless floating stars. Walking towards the fearsome and beautiful nebula, the foolish chaos straightened his back and said. Now you know, don't you? Boo. The nebula shook and glittered intricately. The foolish chaos felt a tingling sensation all over his body from the light emitted from within it. Are you angry? No answer was heard, but it could be felt. Yog Sothoth, closest to Azathoth, their new king. He was angry at him. Why are you angry? Because he is alive, or... Suddenly, in the middle of his speech, the foolish chaos's hat was pulled off. A suffocating energy. The foolish chaos, who was unable to speak any further as he was suppressed by it, knelt on one knee. Boo, you have driven her to death. Are you talking about the whore of the Black Forest? The whore of the Black Forest. It was a name that meant Shub-Niggurath. However, unlike other names, there was no power in that name. There was one reason. It was because that name was not spoken by Azathoth, but by someone else. She has no such name. It's a name I got from following you. You seem to care a lot. Stop. Goo. The body of the foolish chaos was crushed. The space distorted and his body was torn apart, scattered into pieces. A form that could not be recognized. And only then. Then let's end this story. The foolish chaos spoke in their language. Nyog Sothoth, that greedy and sloppy bastard is gone. Nyog Sothoth, a being with the name of unnamed greatness, who could change into a size close to infinity. He was the being who entered the tower first when the wall collapsed. Perhaps, if you only looked at the numbers with names, he was second only to the foolish chaos. Nyog Sothoth's rank was that high, and his death had a serious meaning. We must prepare for a bigger fight. The fight that will take place from now on is not just to occupy one more small world. Ewing, the nebula became intricately distorted. The foolish chaos, who had been torn to shreds by that power, returned to his original form. From now on, we will fight our god. The nebula seemed to tremble in agreement with the words of the foolish chaos. The foolish chaos turned his body at that reaction from the nebula. He thought that he might not be able to return alive from this place. Fortunately, it seemed that he had no intention of killing me right here. Like that again, the moment the foolish chaos was about to descend under the sky. You followed him more than anyone else. There was a horse holding him back. But why? Azathoth, the father of all outer gods, who was like a god. The foolish chaos was the one who had followed him the most. But he, who used to be like that, was now leading the charge against Azathoth. It's a question not worth answering. The foolish chaos did not answer. He continued, walking back the way he had come. Can't you tell by my name? He was the foolish chaos. The one who had taken Azathoth's name more than anyone else, the most foolish one. Cheek. A long wound appeared on Sun Ogong's face. His red eyes reflected the long, sharp claws that had brushed past his face. If he had been just a step slower, the claws would have pierced his face and turned his head into a skewer. But now that he had dodged it, it was his turn. Thud. Get bigger. The Ruyi Jingu bang hit Dallo's torso. Ruyi. Thwack. Kaboom. Dallo's main body, which had been hit by the Ruyi Jingu bang, flew through the wall. Light entered the dark space. Sun Ogong's eyes, which had blown Dallo's away, flashed gold again. Swish. He slid down the Ruyi Jingu bang. His feet were headed towards Dallo's, whom he had blown away. Get smaller. The Ruyi Jingu bang wrapped itself around his hand again. While Dallo's was still struggling to regain his composure. Get longer. Sun Ogong swung the Ruyi Jingu bang with all his might again. Whiz. Bam. As the Ruyi Jingu bang slammed into the ground with Dallo's, the world shook as if an earthquake had struck. The chaotic battlefield was split in half. Hundreds of outer gods were caught in the Ruyi Jingu bang, and dozens of allies would have been caught in the blast as well if Odin had not protected them. But even then, bam, bam, bam. Sun Ogong's attacks did not stop. Fire. Countless Sun Ogongs appeared in the sky. Their hands stretched up to the sky in unison. Rumble. A huge amount of electricity gathered in the clouds in the sky. Thousands of Sun Ogongs fired the electricity. Kaboom. Crack, crackle, boom. Countless bolts of electricity rained down on one spot. All sound disappeared. Even the color disappeared from the world, hidden by the yellow light. Sun Ogong squeezed out all his magic power and unleashed the electricity of Somersault Cloud towards Dallo's. Who? He lowered his raised hand and gasped for breath belatedly. It was the same with the other clones. And so it was with the other doppelgangers. It felt different from when he fought against Dallo's. Like that, after all the electricity had spread, there came a moment when some of the doppelgangers desperately hoped, did we finish him off? Squirm. Inside the deep ravine created by the Ruyi Jingu bang. *T. Dallo's, who had collapsed, was seen starting to move his body again. That's so damn tough. Sun Ogong scratched his head irritably. If it were any other time, he would have been delighted to see an opponent who didn't go down so easily, but the situation was a little different now. He had to win this fight no matter what. Clang. Sun Ogong gripped the Ruyi Jingu bang again. He didn't even have time to catch his breath. Dallo's. He felt a sense of responsibility that he had to take down that guy no matter what. Yeah, Sun Ogong's doppelgangers all made the same gesture. Who's going to take him down first, just once huh? And then all of the doppelgangers were equally surprised. It was because of the familiar face that had returned to the battlefield. And Sun Ogong, who discovered that face. Hey, wait, hey. Thud. He hurriedly performed a somersault and flew towards Yuan. Yuan, who had walked right up to Dallo's. Dallo's seemed to no longer care about Sun Ogong and looked at Yuan. Clang. Dozens of sharp skewers extended from Dallow's body. He was a being that warped time and space and proliferated infinitely from zero. Ordinary people, no, Even a high ranker wouldn't be able to properly recognize his true form before being taken down. And the Yuan of the future wasn't much different. The only difference was that Yuan also had the Wan Kumjang. That guy's eyes still haven't. The distance quickly closed. And at that moment, the sword in Yuan's hand moved. Swish, Dalos's body, which had been rapidly proliferating, was cut. And it was so easy. Watching the dozens of skewers fall like toothpicks, Sun Ogong felt something was strange. Dalos's body, which had fallen to the ground, turned into vapor and dissipated. Yuan's sword was wrapped in the black haze that he had seen before. The somersault stopped abruptly. The reason he stopped was because he knew instinctively that the current Yuan was different. Clang! Yuan's sword, which had cut through Dalos's body, sliced through his body again and again in an instant. Screech! The tip of the sword was fast and accurate. That tough body was sliced so easily. Even Sun Ogong, who was watching, was speechless. Dalos's resistance was fierce. That guy seemed to be shouting something with his mouth open. However, stab! In the end, Yuan's sword pierced through his heart. Whoosh! Dalos's body scattered into smoke. The smoke naturally seeped into Yuan's body as if it were finding its original place. What the hell is that guy? Gulp! It felt different from when he fought Dalos. The power he felt from the being that possessed Yuan's body was now being felt again. Are you messing around again? It wasn't the first time someone had possessed Yuan's body. Just through Yuan's mouth, there had already been two, and in one case, Sun Ogong had witnessed it in person. And in that state, Yuan seemed to be an existence comparable to heaven, to Sun Ogong. Swish! Yuan cut down Dalos like that and looked at the tip of his sword. It didn't take as long as he thought it would to finish the guy off. You've gotten quite soft, Dalos, an individual with the strongest defense among the outers. The fact that such a guy was cut down so easily meant that a lot of shocks had already accumulated before this. Sook! Yuan looked up and met Sun Ogong's eyes. At that moment, when his eyes met Yuan's, Sun Ogong, who had been standing still for a moment, hurried down. Hey, what the hell is going on? Clearly, Yuan had just used the same kind of power as when he had devoured Ubo Satla. There was no other power in the world that could cut the tough Dalos body like tofu. But, unlike then, no one's figure could be seen in Yuan. Who the hell are you? That's a long story. Yuan trailed off and shook his head. This monkey wouldn't understand even if I tried to explain it to him for hours. Yuan's gaze turned upward. It didn't seem like heaven would intervene right away. Now that the guy had noticed his existence, he wouldn't move easily. But this battlefield was not over yet. Let's talk properly later. Later, when, a cry was heard from the side. Sun Ogong was startled by the horn of a mountain goat rubbing against his butt and jumped up. Ow, I'm surprised. Sun Ogong, who jumped up, climbed onto Yuan's head. Baring his fangs like a beast, he glared at the numerous mountain goats that had appeared around him with sharp eyes. Me, the mountain goats of the Black Forest. They appeared all over the battlefield. The black goat with 1,000 young. SSSSK. One of the names taken from Shub-Niggurath. In addition to that, the unnamed vastness, nameless fog. A dancer dancing with flames. The flame of death and decay. Formless chaos, bringing destruction, opening square bracket dot closing square bracket. Poof. Black flames rose around Yuan like a will-o'-the-wisp. In the sky, the round moon rose and opened its eyes. The eyes became Yuan's eyes and looked down at the world. The names taken from the outers. Before, he could only use one or two of these names due to lack of divine power, but before anything else, let's clean up this battlefield. Things were different now. Divine power. 361. Was it because he had obtained Azathoth's name? Power overflowed like a flood. Chapter 507. Odin looked down at the battlefield with his arms hanging down. Just a few minutes ago, he had been moving without rest, but now there was no need for that. The same went for Brunhilde. Bam, bah, goats that had suddenly rushed onto the battlefield were biting at the outers. Their teeth were instantly cutting off the outers, breaths, turning their bodies to dust. That wasn't all. Boom, flames were rising up everywhere. Whenever the flames engulfed the outers, they would disappear without a trace. There was no need to fight hard. This was just a massacre. Those goats are. Before Odin could belatedly understand the situation. Thud. Amidst the chaotic battlefield, Yuan was seen walking leisurely. Next to him, Sun Wukong was noisily chattering about something. Ah, so if you explain it to me now, I still won't get it. Don't tell me you're ignoring me because I'm an idiot right now. You just realized that now, monkey. Sun Wukong swung his fist at Yuan. Yuan lightly dodged the fist and walked towards Odin. In this large battlefield, the two seemed to be leisurely, as if they were in a different world. You did this. Odin realized that what was happening now was Yuan's doing. At those words, Yuan's gaze turned to Odin. Sun Wukong, who seemed to have been offended by the word, monkey, was still swinging his fists at Yuan. Yuan dodged Sun Wukong's fists and replied. That's right, I thought something was strange, but you came back as a completely different person. Whoosh, Odin looked up at the sky. There was a huge cloud covering the purple sky. The unnamed greatness was covering the sky, showing off its presence. Each and every name held such overwhelming power. It was unbelievable to see with one's own eyes that all of this was the ability of a single person. Is this the result of the plan that you guys made? At Odin's question of, you guys, Sun Wukong, whose face was half crushed by Yuan's hand, stopped what he was doing and turned his eyes. No, this isn't it. Surprisingly, the reply came from Sun Wukong. From the beginning, the idea was to create one perfect being. A ranker who could handle everything from Heracles, gigantification and my fire eyes truth-seeing to your Gnur and magic. That was our ideal. He usually seemed like an idiot, but for the first time, he seemed smart. Sun Wukong was originally considered as a candidate for the one to return to clockwork with Yuan, just like him. As such, Sun Wukong had an ideal hero in mind to win this battle. Luckily, this guy grew to fit that role. If he'd only been given more time, he probably would have become even stronger than expected. Sun Wukong knew it too. Yuan's talent was the best among them. He had never lost to Yuan in a fight, but that was only because he had entered the tower before him. What if Yuan had been given more time? He didn't know the answer. And it was the same this time. However, but what the heck is this? This doesn't make any sense. As he muttered, Sun Wukong was suddenly thrown backwards. Arg, this is unfair. How did the gap suddenly get this big? Sun Wukong screamed. He thought of Yuan as a comrade and a friend, but he also secretly thought of him as a rival. But suddenly, that Yuan had gotten so far ahead of him. In the end, this was what Sun Wukong was trying to say. Yuan had become an existence on a completely different level. That guy made this whole thing pointless. Tisk. Odin clicked his tongue and looked at Yuan. He didn't really care what Sun Wukong, who was rolling around on the floor, thought. In any case, the power that Yuan now possessed was something that had nothing to do with their original plan. Only one thing mattered. Don't beat around the bush. Can you win? Whether or not they could win this fight. Yuan hesitated for a moment before answering that question. If it were before, I would have said yes, unconditionally. Unconditionally, the probability of winning was maybe 10%. Did that mean that the probability had increased to 100%? Now it's about 50-50. What do you mean? Our forces are too weak compared to theirs. They're stronger than we thought. Yuan's gaze turned to the sky. The nebula floating in the sky was also a problem, but what he was worried about now was something else. I've given out too many names in vain. There are many names that have been taken away. It was the numbers, Azathoth, the names he had given out and those that had been taken away. Even if only half of them entered this tower, the tower's current power would not be enough to win. Still, there's no need to be disappointed. It might be a miracle that we've come this far. I'm not disappointed. Rather, I'm relieved. It was fortunate that it was half. Odin had originally thought it would be much lower than that. Mimir had said it clearly. We can't win like this. Before the fight with Shub-Niggurath began. He shook his head, his face pale. That goat is just the beginning. But now we can't even be sure that we can catch him. The day before the day of Concord. He remembered the conversation he had with Mimir that day quite vividly. We need a variable, another bigger variable. Was that when it happened? Mimir lost both of his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. He seemed to have made up his mind that day. Mimir did not tell him what that determination was. He wouldn't be able to find out, since he had lost his eyes and had been asleep ever since. But one thing was for sure, he would find out before the end of this fight. Anyway, first of all, Wang, Odin reached up. A dozen or so magic circles unfolded above his head. Odin's eyes flashed white as he unleashed the power of Yggdrasil from his body. I guess I should clean up this battlefield first. It was time to counterattack. The battlefield was quickly cleared. The difference in power was overwhelming. With the exception of Dalos and Enyog-Sothoth, the other outer gods were not beings of that caliber. It was strange. Why aren't more coming? Sun Wukong, who still had plenty of energy left, was the first to express his regret. It was strange, he had thought that once the wall was down, they would keep pouring in, endlessly. Yu-won looked at the wall in the distance. It was obvious that the creatures that had been pouring in had stopped coming at some point. There's no way, those guys were under the control of the nebula. Since he was there, nebula wouldn't have sent the outers here. The more they send, the stronger I'll get. Divine power, 369. After killing the outers, including Dalos, his divine power had increased even more. The essence of their power was their names. And those names all came from Azathoth, from Yu-won himself. The more he recovered their power, the stronger Yu-won became. No, to be exact, he was returning to his original state. That doesn't mean I'll back down. So the next step is probably. In the midst of the chaos, the battlefield was barely being cleaned up. Yu-won muttered as he watched the scene. General attack, approved. Yu-won's words were heard by Odin and Heracles, who were nearby. Soon after, reinforcements arrived, including King Uma, Michael, and the Yulong army with Athena. Those who arrived a step behind Yu-won. Of them, the one who was most apologetic was the Yulong army's leader, Yulong Jin-gun. We're very late. We are. I've heard the circumstances. Odin didn't blame them. It was an unavoidable circumstance. He couldn't blame them for being late due to urgent contact and rushing to be the first to arrive. For now, it seems like it's time to ask for cooperation from other guilds. Yulong Jin-gun nodded at Odin's words. I agree. It's certain that not all of them have moved yet. The forces gathered here now were not insignificant, but now was the time for the tower to unite as one. Countless rankers and high rankers. It was impossible to imagine fighting them without all of them joining forces. If that's the case, I'll do it. To everyone's surprise, Sun Wukong stepped into the conversation. Odin and Yulong Jin-gun. The two of their gazes turned to Sun Wukong. Unpleasant gazes. Sun Wukong grimaced at their distrustful gazes. What, you don't trust me? If this place were a battlefield right now, I would gladly turn my back to you. He was Sun Wukong. He couldn't be careless. Moreover, when it came to asking for cooperation, Sun Wukong was the last person he would ask. Just leave it to me. At that moment, Yu-won walked up next to Sun Wukong and said. He's done a pretty good job of the same thing before. This guy has the skills. He might be the best person for the job. Odin nodded at the word, skill. I see. The multi-clone technique. Multi-clone technique. It was a skill that represented Sun Ogong along with the Wan Jiamzheng. Sun Ogong had the ability to create over 1,000 clones at once. And sometimes, this guy's reckless personality helps. Something similar had happened before. Powers that were divided into hundreds and thousands under the name of a guild. Sun Ogong sent his clones to gather them together. And in the process, he swung his Ruyi Jingu Bang at those who refused. And that actually helped. Yu-won intended to believe the same result this time. And his colleagues, who had planned together, thought the same. Odin, who had been skeptical, also changed his mind. If Yu-won said this much, it was worth believing. On the other hand, he also thought it was a time when Sun Ogong's recklessness was needed. So just do what you always do for this one time. I believe you. Believe. A sly smile. Sun Ogong patted his chest. Okay, leave it to me. I'll bring them all. Ooh ha 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 ha. Somehow, I feel more uneasy. There was no case where Sun Ogong was confident and things went well. Yu-won felt even greater anxiety at his boast. What about you? What are you going to do now? Odin asked Yu-won about his next move. Sun Ogong's role was important, but Yu-won was the greatest power in this fight. It was no exaggeration to say that the outcome of this fight depended on his actions, plans, and his power. Me. Yu-won's gaze turned to the sky. I'll be very busy from now on. There was no need to go far. The enemy he had to fight right now was constantly reflected in his eyes. I need to negotiate with that guy. A purple sky rose in the sky. A nebula made up of an infinite number of stars that existed above the sky, neither night nor day. To fight that, he needed to be stronger than he was now. You don't have to come in from over there, right? Odin's eyes flashed at Yu-won's answer. Don't tell me. He said, don't tell me, but anyone who wasn't a fool could tell what Yu-won meant. Yeah, but that, don't tell me, was nothing special to Yu-won. I'm thinking of going over there. After all, that was where Azathoth lived in the first place. Chapter 508. Yu-won walked while clutching his throbbing head. Sun Wukong's nagging voice still echoed in his head. Me too, I'm going too. That was Sun Wukong's response when Yuan said he was going outside. It was because he thought it would be much more fun to fight the outers outside the tower than to send his clones everywhere in the tower. However, you're not a kid, why are you nagging like this? Shish, just listen for a sec. Ah, I heard everything, you jerks. Sun Wukong's loud voice was not accepted in the end. He had something to do here. Then it was right to do what he was supposed to do. Yuan just left Sun Wukong behind. And behind such Yuan. Thud, 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 Pandora and Heracles, who were as big as three of her, followed Yuan with heavy steps. The two of them followed Yuan. Do you have to follow me like this? Yuan stopped for a moment and looked back. Pandora nodded at the question, and Heracles crossed his arms and spoke. Yeah, we do. 2 is better than 1, and 3 is better than 2. That's right. When did they become so good at joking around? The forest was approaching its end, and the wall was visible in the distance. Yuan sighed and glanced at the two who were determined to follow him to the end. I'm sure all the memories have been transferred. Especially Pandora. Azathoth's memories were in her. The memories that were in the box he had given to Zeus, the foolish chaos. He had thought that Pandora was obsessed with him because of those memories. Is it like inertia? More importantly, could he take these two with him? Yuan, who had been looking at the two of them alternately for a while, sighed and started to walk again. I'll protect my own body. Not to mention Heracles, even Pandora would not be in much danger unless she encountered an outer of considerable rank. Above all, this was not his fight alone. Both Heracles and Pandora. Both of them had suffered from what the foolish chaos had done. Zeus killed Heracles, mother, Alcmene, because of his scheme, and Pandora had been trapped in a dark prison for over 1,000 years. They have the right to fight. Swish, the three arrived at the wall. Yuan touched the half-broken wall with his hand. The wall that had not yet collapsed. It's a pain in the ass to go back. Should I just break it and go? Heracles stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves. A heavily cracked wall. Heracles thought it would be enough to break it like this. Heracles waved one hand as if to tell them to step aside and threw a thunderbolt with the other fist. But Yuan did not move. Were you curious? Instead, Yuan asked Heracles with his back to him. I don't know why you don't ask, but you don't have to be so careful. The tone of his voice changed subtly. Heracles found the Yuan he had seen in the purple nebula above the sky through Yuan's back. The person had suddenly changed. It was scary, but on the other hand, it was also curious. What on earth had happened to Yuan? I have become a filled square th. Some of Yuan's voice sounded broken to Heracles' ears. Most people could not hear that name. Only those who knew the name from the beginning or those of the same rank could hear the name. Yuan turned his head. Their eyes met. Thud. Heracles' pupils shook along with the feeling of his heart sinking. Heracles' pupils shook with a sinking feeling. As if to say that if they didn't come out, he would destroy the guild. Son Goku continued to rampage. What is this feeling? He almost took a step back in surprise. The moment their eyes met, Heracles couldn't help but acknowledge the feeling he felt. Awe, perhaps, awe of a great being. And fear caused by that awe. It was not easy to admit it. Heracles, like Son Goku, thought he was walking alongside Yuan. But who would have thought it would have turned out this much? How many letters did you hear? A few letters. It meant the number of letters heard from the name Yuan mentioned. 3 letters. 4 letters. Heracles looked back. 4 letters. Pandora had heard more names than him. Yuan nodded as if he had expected it. You've heard a lot with 3 letters. Pandora knew Azathoth's name in the first place, so Yuan wanted to know how much Heracles could hear. PSSS's. The wall surface touched by Yuan's fingertips slowly melted away. The wall was disappearing. At that unbelievable sight, the lightning that had been standing on Heracles' fist gradually faded. If it had been 2 letters, I wouldn't have taken you. The space that appeared before Yuan's eyes. I would have been disappointed if it had been 1 letter. What are you talking about? I became that guy. I'm still confused whether I'm Kim Yuan or Azathoth. Yuan shook his head at the uncertain voice. For now, I'm thinking of it as Kim Yuan. What the hell, who is that? The being who made this wall. He was able to destroy it because it was a wall he had created. Yuan explained Azathoth briefly. The beginning of all this. The point of the Big Bang. The sum of all names. That's you, somehow. Yuan shrugged and took a step towards the wall. I was just curious. I know it for now. The look in Yuan's eyes and his tone of voice, who had erased the wall to create a space for the party to pass through, had returned to the Yuan that Heracles knew. Does it change only once when using power? Swoosh. Yuan, who had finished speaking, disappeared through the wall. The boundary of the tower that no one could break. Pandora followed Yuan, who disappeared beyond it, without hesitation. It was confusing because of the sudden story, but it was not possible to stay here like this. Heracles followed him. Thud. Same time. An emergency was declared in the large guild, Sashinsu, for divine beasts. The monkey is here. Qian Madizong. It's Qian Madizong. Kwang. The sturdy tile house collapsed. Ruyi Bang made the tile house collapse in an instant. Block it. It's a clone anyway. Sashinsu. A guild with 4 high rankers as representatives, which has considerable influence on the 40th floor. They were prepared to fight and block Qian Madizong's clone. There was only one reason. We will not cooperate with Asgard. War. Let them fight among themselves. Why should we? I don't know what's going on, but it's better. If this happens, Asgard or Olympus power will weaken. We are neutral. If anyone asks for cooperation, send them back immediately. If it is unavoidable, use force. It was the order of the 4 high rankers representing the guild. As they feared, Asgard sent people directly. In addition, they knew that Son Goku's clones had been visiting each guild recently. I thought I could stop it enough. It was just a clone. But it was a mistake. Instead of the leftovers, come out, big shot. Wang. It was not enough to block Son Goku, who was wielding Ruyi Bang, with only the guild's rankers. With just the guild's top rankers, it wasn't enough to stop Sun Ogong, who swung the Ruyi Bang. As if to say that he would destroy the guild altogether if they didn't come out, Sun Ogong continued to cause a commotion. Finally, whoosh, crimson flames soared. Sun Ogong, who had been swinging the Ruyi Bang, stopped his actions and looked up at the flames. A high ranker with wings spread wide, spewing hot flames. A woman with a pair of crimson wings spread out and beautiful crimson hair flowing. Suzaku, the high ranker of the 4 divine beasts Sashinsu. She glared at Sun Ogong and said, "You're causing too much of a commotion. You've finally decided to show up." Whoosh, the earth shook with a cool ocean breeze. Sharp winds became a typhoon and enveloped the surroundings. It wasn't just Suzaku, the high rankers representing Sashinsu. Suzaku, Cheonbryong, Hyunmu, and Beko. They all appeared before Sun Ogong. Arrogant clone of the monkey. Where do you think this is that you're causing such a commotion? How dare you, you young pup? We are neutral. We've made our position clear, haven't we? The high rankers of Sashinsu each said their piece. Sun Ogong ignored their words and replied, "Not neutral, but bystanders. You know that, don't you? That's why the purple sky has been appearing here and there lately." How dare you? How dare I, you ask? Don't you know that this fight is different from a simple fight between guilds? This was a fight between worlds. Just because the fight with Asgard was over, the outer gods wouldn't stop. If Asgard falls, there will be another. And another, and another after that. Sashinsu knew it too, that the outer gods' target was this tower, and that if Asgard fell, it would be their turn someday. Despite that, they didn't move. They might not lose. Asgard might win, and in the process, Asgard and Olympus might be weakened. Sashinsu themselves might become the masters of the tower. Are you just going to hide behind Asgard and stay safe? If so, then so be it. Sun Ogong's eyes widened as if he had expected that. You're just waiting for other guilds to be ruined by this fight. For their own position to rise while they sit back and do nothing. And that was a decision based on the belief and expectation that their turn would never come. You'll regret this decision in the end. I know it. Sashinsu, the most stubborn ones who refused the alliance until the very end. That's why I'm not going to just turn around and leave here. Cooperation forced upon them was not right. Because of that thinking, they had failed to join forces as one in the future. At least until Sun Ogong stepped up. Do you understand, you selfish bastards? How dare you? Don't you know your place? You're just a clone. Clatter, 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 clatter. The magic power emitted by the 4 Sashinsu shook the ground. Suzaku, who had the highest ranking, was a high ranker in the double digits. The other 3 were also high rankers within the top 200. However, Sun Ogong wasn't that scared, even with the magic power emitted by the 4 top-ranked high rankers. Of course not. Before we fight, just in case you're misunderstanding something. Sun Ogong scratched his head as if it was absurd. Do you guys really think I'm a clone? Quote question mark quote. Quote question mark quote. Bewildered looks. To Sun Ogong's question of how they dared to face him, the magic power that seemed like it would overturn the entire earth disappeared in an instant. PFF'd. The magic power fizzled out. Silence fell as the Sashinsu looked at each other. Feeling that something was wrong, Suzaku, who was closest to Sun Ogong, opened her mouth. See, can you give us some time? Chapter 509. Reaper eventually surrendered. The existence of the heavenly great emperor, not an avatar, was enough to wipe out an entire large guild. Ha, ha ha ha, if you were the main body, wouldn't you have said so in advance? That's what I'm saying. If you had shown that much sincerity, we would have pretended to lose. The white tiger and the blue dragon, the two high rankers approached Son Goku and smiled awkwardly. Son Goku sighed at their appearance, which seemed so cowardly and even pathetic. Are there only fools in the Reaper? The Reapers were speechless. Son Goku scratched his head irritably. It was so tempting to just go ahead and do it. With that thought, Son Goku got on the somersault cloud. I'm going to set some annoying conditions. Never kill anyone. Eugene's warning was not a mere whim. In the future, Son Goku would visit guilds that had refused to cooperate like now, and he would use force quite strongly against guilds that did not listen. In the end, the guilds that never moved. The ones who cowardly hid behind other guilds and planned for their own safety with the blood of others. Son Goku did not just leave such people alone. But the fight has just begun. Keep that in mind. This was what Eugene had warned him about the most. The tower's rankers, players, and even the residents. The guilds that did not move until more than half of all races were wiped out. But now was just the beginning of the fight with the outer. Son Goku knew that much. However, his anger was still burning. It's so tempting to just. His eyes blazed fiercely. The Reapers who met his gaze trembled. Son Goku on the somersault cloud began to move. Looking down, he could see the injured rankers regaining consciousness one by one. Still, no guild members had died in this riot. Tisk. Son Goku smacked his lips as he began to move to the next location. Before, he had caused a riot in the heat of the moment, but after all, there was no fun in just talking or showing off his power. Moreover, there was someone who had become even more interesting, so he couldn't help but feel regretful. I should have followed them. Clatter, clatter. Heracles threw a dry branch into the blazing fire. Every time he inhaled, his breath would come out as steam. He thought that once he became a ranker, he would no longer feel the cold, but it seemed that was a mistake. It's chilly. Cold. Pandora was wearing Eugene's clothes of the four spirits. It was cold enough to be below freezing. Outside the tower, it was so cold at night that it would freeze not only the skin but also the bones and soul, and during the day, the atmosphere would become as hot as hell. Even Pandora found the cold difficult to bear. It really was a strange place. I told you not to follow me. As if he had expected this, Eugene sighed. His white breath came out in thick puffs. Shaking his head, Eugene took out some coffee powder from his inventory, mixed it with water, and heated it up. Drink it. You'll feel a little better. Thank you. No, not you. Instead of the offered cup, Eugene handed the coffee to Pandora. Eugene brewed another cup of coffee at the sight of Heracles looking embarrassed. The cup seemed like a miniature in Heracles' hand. It seems to be quite warm. I can't see anything. Heracles, who had finished his coffee in one gulp, looked ahead. An empty desert where nothing could be seen. Unlike the inside of the tower, there was no such thing as civilization here. It's one of two things. Either they ran away, or they decided to join forces and fight back somehow. They hadn't seen anything for over a day. The guys already knew they were coming. That made sense. Sniff. Eugene looked up at the sky. Unlike the purple sky that appeared in the tower, the sky here was full of stars. Unlike the purple sky that appeared on the tower, the sky here was full of stars. There was nothing to talk about. The only special events were being bullied because I was an orphan or fighting. It was one of the two. Knowing the identity of the stars, it was impossible to just look at them as beautiful, but there was no denying their beauty. Did that guy tell you? Soto's eyes were everywhere, inside and outside the tower. He could sense that the guy was watching him. Then he understood why the others had already suffered. I need to hurry a little. This moment would probably be his last chance to rest. Yu-1 looked out over the endlessly vast desert. I walked a lot around here in the past. Enough to get sick of it. Long ago, Azathoth walked through this desert. In this world of only sand and sky, there was nothing else to do. Just sit still or walk. There were only two choices. Heracles asked Yu-1, whose words seemed filled with sentimentality. When you say, back then, are you talking about when you were that guy? Yeah, and now? A moment of hesitation. But the hesitation was truly just a moment. Kim Yu-won, a response that was given as if to confirm something. Heracles narrowed his eyes. Did you struggle? No. Then why did you hesitate? My answer came late without me realizing it. As if it were something obvious that I had to think about before I could come to a conclusion. Yu-won was also uncomfortable. Although he consciously continued to think of himself as Kim Yu-won, the strong name, Azathoth, that was embedded in his subconscious mind did not disappear. He had lived a long time, and to be doing self-reflection at this age. Anyway, I'm glad you came to that conclusion. Really. Heracles looked at the brightly burning campfire. The fire was burning with Yuan's magic power. After watching the fire in silence for a while, Heracles opened his mouth. I grew up on Olympus. Quote. When I was young, I trained and climbed the tower to become a great ranker. The process was smooth, and I eventually fought in the Gigantomachy and was called a hero. The hero, Heracles, he was ashamed to be called by that name. Despite that, the fact that he uttered the word, hero, meant that it wasn't just some empty boast. After the war, I became a lumberjack. Strangely enough, the blood on my hands that wouldn't wash off even under a waterfall seemed to disappear when I became a lumberjack. So that's why you became a lumberjack. That's why I'm going to become a carpenter. Heracles, who spoke like that, had the expectant expression of a child. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. With my strength, I'll probably be the best carpenter in this tower. He was assuming that this fight would be over. A carpenter. Heracles had already been a lumberjack for a long time. After the Gigantomachy ended, and until the name Heracles was forgotten. He collected wood in the forest and used his points to help people in need. What are you guys going to do? Heracles looked at Yu-won and Pandora in turn. He asked them about their dreams. Us. Yeah, don't you guys have something you want to do? Especially. Heracles asked Yu-won as he looked at him. You originally had a world that you lived in. His original world. At those words, Yu-won thought for a moment. What kind of place was it? He had briefly stayed there a few years ago when he used the clockwork to go back in time, but he didn't remember it well. What did his house look like? I forgot. Heracles made a strange expression at Yu-won's answer. Forgot. I was an orphan. My first memory was of not having either a mother or a father. Orphan. It was the word that had stabbed Yuan's heart the most. Even without that, having to live alone in a difficult world was colder than this cold. I lived day by day and grew old. I don't remember the process very well. It was a long time ago. And it wasn't a good memory. Why did you say you don't like talking about the past? Why didn't you ever talk about the old days? There was nothing to talk about. If there was something special, it was either being bullied because I was an orphan, or fighting. One of the two. Yu-won shrugged as he said that. This is my home now. Even if I could go back, I don't think I would. The time he had spent in the original world was only about 20 years. On the other hand, the time he had spent fighting alongside his comrades like Sun Ogong, Heracles, and Odin was dozens of times longer. Where his home was didn't matter anymore. Yu-won's world had already changed. What do you want to do when it's all over? What I want to do. Yu-won trailed off. It was a question he had never thought about. What did I want to do? Yu-won pondered for a moment before shaking his head. Nothing. Nothing. Really. Yeah. Heracles looked disappointed at Yu-won's answer. He felt sorry that Yu-won didn't have anything he wanted to do. But then, doing nothing is what I want to do the most. Yu-won's words were more sincere than any other answer. Enjoying my free time or sleeping a lot. Not planning anything, not moving around too much. 1,000 years after the Gigantomachy ended. Unlike Heracles, who had lost his purpose and ended up cutting down trees, Yu-won had spent most of his life running towards a single goal. To survive, I fought more fiercely than anyone else for a long time. Maybe that's why, after going through a long passage, I wish there was nothing, if possible. As he spoke, his thoughts slowly became organized. What he really wanted, Yu-won summed it up in one word. I just want to be a little bored. Bored. The moment he realized that Yu-won truly desired it, Heracles smiled without regret. How modest. But that's so difficult. It's not easy, but it's not far off now. Heracles, who had laughed heartily as the desert disappeared, soon looked back at Pandora, who had a determined expression on her face. Judging by her eyes, it seemed like she would give an amazing answer if he just poked her a little. Pandora, I'm going to get married. Mar. His eyes widened. Heracles looked back at Yu-won, thinking it couldn't be. With him. Yeah, with Yu-won. I'm definitely going to do it. It was a statement that made Heracles' heart sink. On the other hand, Yuan, who was the subject of the conversation, seemed indifferent. You just got confessed to. I know, you're not surprised. I'm surprised enough. Maybe not as much as you, though. Why would I be more surprised? Yuan was the one involved. But Heracles was the one who was surprised. Yuan seemed to have expected it to some extent. Pandora, if they were to discuss the most beautiful woman in the tower, she would be mentioned along with Tsukuyomi and Aphrodite. And yet, Pandora had just confessed to him. Heracles, who was taken aback, asked with a wry smile. What if he doesn't accept? I'll still do it, Pandora muttered stubbornly, her face full of displeasure, as if she didn't like the question. Unconditionally, unconditionally, really, Heracles scratched his head, wondering if her answer made any sense. What if there's nothing after you go through the long passage? You said you wished there was nothing. At the end of it all, something truly amazing awaited him. Crackle, crackle, the campfire continued to burn. Yuan didn't respond to Pandora's confession. Pandora didn't seem to be expecting an answer either, as she acted no differently than usual. Pandora was slowly sipping her coffee, blowing on it. Yuan was lost in thought, poking the campfire with a poker. Heracles thought to himself, I don't know if those two will end up together. Looking up at the starlit sky. But I hope that day comes. Chapter 510. Chijiji, lightning energy boiled around his heart. The golden electricity inherent in his body flowed through his arm and settled in his fist. It was then that his eyes glistened and he extended his fist. Quirang, along with the sound of lightning, a fist pierced a hole in the body of the giant outer. The outer, which had a hard shell like a crustacean wrapped around its body, had half of its body blown away. Thud, phew, Heracles, with beads of sweat on his forehead, let out a long breath. How many had he taken down? It seemed like this was over 100. Still, I guess this is about it. Having dealt with the last remaining outer, Heracles' gaze turned to Pandora, who was behind him. At first, he was worried, but she was strong. Even in terms of pure combat power, she was among the top 3 gods of Olympus. She also seemed to be a little out of breath, but there didn't seem to be any particular injuries. I guess I don't have to worry. Jebek. At the sound of footsteps, Heracles' gaze turned to Yuan. It was quite a big battle. Nevertheless, the result of this battle was an overwhelming victory. Heracles himself had fought quite hard. It's overwhelming. The power Yuan had shown was beyond the charts. The desert he was standing on was covered in pitch-black chaos. Leading the mountain goats and wielding flames, Yuan devoured thousands of outers. Was it divine power? After coming here, Yuan had become stronger and stronger. His eyes are different again. The eyes that looked at the remains of the outers scattered on the floor. Having watched for nearly a month since coming outside together, Heracles immediately noticed whose eyes those were. The current Yuan was not Kim Yuan, but one step closer to Azathoth. Are they traces of Sototh? Heracles listened to Yuan's mutter. Sototh, did you hear that? Yuan's eyes were slowly returning. However, it was not completely the same as before. Looking into his eyes, Heracles wondered if he was Yuan or Azathoth. Yeah, I definitely heard it this time. Sototh. The name closest to Azathoth had 2 more letters in front. However, Heracles couldn't hear the shortened name at first. But now, about a month later, Heracles was able to hear the full name for the first time. Who the hell is Sototh? Only after he was able to hear the name properly did Heracles become interested in it. Yuan had mentioned the name Sototh several times. It was as if that name was the only name he had to care about. You must have met him once. Me, up in the sky, the guy we were told not to look at. Don't be curious about it, and don't go looking for it. Never. That name was Sototh. Sototh, huh, Heracles recalled the huge nebula he had seen in the sky. It felt like he was looking at infinity. In front of that huge being, Heracles felt himself becoming infinitely small. The guy wasn't simply a living being, but seemed like an aggregate of countless worlds. He couldn't even imagine fighting against something like that, let alone having the confidence to win. If there's anything special about him, I guess you could say he's the ex-husband of Shub-Niggurath. Ex-husband, to be exact, Shub-Niggurath chased after him one-sidedly. It was around that time that he started being called a gigolo. I guess even those guys have something called love. It was closer to madness than love. He was attracted to a bigger name. That guy, the image of Shub-Niggurath came to Heracles' mind. The power she possessed was truly overwhelming. The power that overwhelmed the kings of this tower, including Vishnu, Odin, and Zeus. She had the power to drive the tower into a corner all by herself. But she, who had been like that, wagged her tail to a greater power and was called a prostitute. Swoosh. Heracles looked up at the sky. Is that the guy? A purple sky twinkling with stars. Recalling the day he had ascended to that sky, Heracles asked. What do you mean by traces? They're not names I gave them. Tell me more. These guys were born eating the names that Sotos gave them. I don't know if they were just given them or if they're much older. Yuan, no. Azathoth laughed as if it was funny. If it's the latter, I guess he's acting like me. Heracles was startled by the sense of presence that flowed from Yuan at that moment. He didn't know before, but when he said his last words, he was definitely close to Azathoth. Did he realize that fact? Yuan shook his head once and changed the subject. Anyway, it's a good thing. Being able to hear all the names means that the stakes have been raised. Is that so? Definitely the last month. Heracles felt himself changing as he fought without her and accompanied Yuan. Thud. Heracles sighed with regret as he stretched his fingers. But it's still not enough. After all, in the end, it all depends on you. Nevertheless, Heracles thought that the key to this fight was still Yuan. The power of Azathoth that he possessed. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the outcome of this fight would be determined by how that power was used. But, it's not necessarily like that. Why, in the end, this is a fight that I can't do alone. I got the name Azathoth, but that doesn't mean I've completely become Azathoth. What the hell are you talking about? Heracles, who had not understood for a moment, looked up. The sky that could be seen anywhere. Yuan pointed to the sky and called it, Sotos. Moreover, the guys that had just appeared were traces of that Sotos. Is it because the names are all scattered? Yes. Then your role is to take care of that Sotos guy. I'm glad I didn't come with Son Goku. It would have been harder to make him understand than to fight him. Yuan did not deny it. This fight would not end without eliminating that sky. Not only the foolish chaos, but also the purple sky had to be dealt with before the fight could end. They have names and power. They probably have names that they received from Sotos. Are we supposed to stop those leftovers? Yes. That much. Yuan shook his head at Heracles' seemingly trivial response. That, leftover, includes the foolish chaos. Thud. Heracles' expression hardened on the spot. The foolish chaos. He was the one who had taken Zeus's life. Perhaps because he had already fought him once, Heracles was more eager to fight. It's nice to hear that. You have to be careful with that guy. I don't know what he's thinking. Besides, it doesn't matter what he's thinking. Tisk. Light poured out of Heracles' golden eyes. I'm the one who let him get away. It's my fault, so I want to make up for it. Is that so? Yuan pondered for a moment before nodding his head. It was a fight that could not be avoided anyway. Then it might be better to just run into it than to talk about it. After all, fighting the foolish chaos was not Heracles' role alone. However, there was still something that bothered him. I don't know about the others, but I thought Neela would be different. The little guy who had followed him. At some point, he had drifted away, but the guy was standing on the opposite side. How will he use that name? The foolish chaos. One of the biggest names that Azathoth had. Amorphous half of chaos. Sototh was a problem, but how he used that name was also a variable. Swoosh. Yuan raised his head and looked up at Sototh. When would he make his move? He must have a lot of preparations to make. His door could not be crossed, even if he had Azathoth's name. That was why Yuan had to meet him and come back down. Was he scared, or did he need more preparation? Either way, it was certain that Sototh was not moving right now. He couldn't just waste that time. For the past month, he had met quite a few outer gods and regained their names. Thanks to that, he was able to regain his strength along with the names. Divine Power. 401. After raising it one by one, his divine power exceeded 400. He was starting to wonder. When all the names were gathered, Azathoth's name was complete. What would this stat be? Thud. Empty desert. To find more names, Yuan started walking again. Another 3 months had passed. The tower was busier than ever. All 100 worlds were bustling at once. Rankers and players from the upper floors moved as one. The day when the most guilds moved in the long history of the tower. There were more people present than on the day of Unity, when the fight against Shub-Niggurath took place. Almost everyone's here. Odin saw countless rankers. Large guilds that were the backbone of the tower, including Asgard and Olympus. And even the mid-level guilds that had made a name for themselves. It was Sun Wukong who was able to gather even the Grim Reapers, who were known for being lazy. I guess it was a good choice to leave it to the Great Sage. I can see how much he has gathered in such a short period of time. Odin nodded at Brunhild's words as she approached. It was definitely a good choice. Right now, when he needed to move many guilds in the shortest possible time, there was probably no one who could handle the job as decisively as Sun Wukong. Where is that monkey now? He's up there, riding the Kinto cloud. In my opinion, it feels like he's about to fight a great battle. Fighting spirit, Odin's gaze turned to the sky. Fighting spirit, for that Sun Wukong, it was a strange word. Sun Wukong was the kind of guy who would run into a fight with fire in his eyes and just have fun. Between the clouds, Odin, who had expanded his vision with magic, could see Sun Wukong's back. Sun Wukong, who was sitting cross-legged and looking at the wall, showed some kind of determination or fighting spirit, as Brunhild said. On top of the huge Kinto cloud that covered the purple sky. The eyelids that had been covering it were peeled off, revealing the fire eyes that had been hidden inside. He's coming. Thud, in the middle of the desert where he was walking slowly. Yuan stopped and raised his head. When Yuan, who hadn't looked at the sky for a while, suddenly stopped and raised his head, Hercules, who was following him, asked. What's wrong? Clatter, clatter. Before answering, Hercules looked around. Pandora, why are you? My body. Pandora trembled. She seemed to have adapted to the cold of the desert quite a bit, but she was trembling even more than when she first came outside. Hercules was puzzled, and Pandora was terrified. Yuan didn't answer Hercules' question and looked up at the sky, opening his mouth. Is he coming? The night sky filled with countless stars filled Yuan's vision. Sototh. The stars began to pour down. Chapter 511. The stars are pouring down. That's how it looked to Heracles. The purple waves that formed the sky and the stars embedded in them like jewels crumpled, crushed, and gradually grew smaller. Expanding, contracting, twisting and warping space-time as they approached. And the closer the sky got, the more. With that thing. Heracles felt despair. Fight. Despair descended. That was Heracles' impression. When he glanced to the side, Pandora was on the verge of collapsing. Her body was trembling so violently that she seemed like she would collapse at any moment. Get out of here. Surprised by Yuan's voice, Heracles turned his head. He was not the Yuan that Heracles knew. Don't worry too much. It's just that I can't help it right now. Yuan knew of Heracles' worries. His gaze, which had been fixed on the stars pouring down from the sky, had already shifted completely from Yuan to Azathoth. Are you okay? Don't worry about me, he knew. This worry was nothing more than daring. There was no being in this world who could worry about Azathoth. The fact that that guy has moved means that the other side has begun as well. Heracles' eyes widened at Yuan's words. The other side was also inside the tower. In other words, it meant that the other outer gods, excluding Zesto, had begun to move. Thud, Pandora's knees hit the ground. As long as that sky was approaching, Pandora couldn't move. She would be more strongly affected by the outer gods than anyone else. For now, I'll leave her to you. Heracles hesitated for a moment at Yuan's request, then nodded. Heracles, with Pandora slung over one shoulder, began to run in a hurry. For a moment, Yuan's gaze followed Heracles. He was worried that Zesto might target Heracles and Pandora. But fortunately, swish, the pouring stars did not target them. It was only natural. He's not that stupid. Azathoth was here. The purple waves pouring down began to gather into one at one point. And to fight that guy. Swoosh, black chaos began to gather around Yuan. You don't have to grumble so much. The formless chaos bares its teeth at the one being that exists. The chaos that had gathered around Yuan took on a single form. Yuan calmed the faint figure of an adult that appeared behind him. Dan-ah. Thump, thump, thump. Crunch. Heracles' feet moved quickly. He didn't look back. If he did, it felt like the faint breathing of Pandora on his shoulder would stop at any moment. Santo P. Thud. Pandora's hand hit Heracles' back. The trembling of her body was transmitted through her hand. Naturally, Heracles couldn't turn his body. They're in a hurry too. I'll stay. You're just getting in the way. Pandora's eyes shook at Heracles' venomous words. You're not following me because you want to get in the way, are you? Quote. Pandora bit her lip. She didn't know either. There was nothing she could do in the upcoming fight. Just by the sky approaching, she had collapsed, trembling. But why did you follow me? He understood, but he couldn't help but feel sorry for her. We've only just started to be able to be together. He could feel the leather clothes on his shoulders getting wet. Heracles' fast hopping speed slowed down a bit. The words Pandora had said to him about 3 months ago came to his mind. I'm going to get married. Pandora was sincere. She was usually mostly emotionless, perhaps because of the influence of the cursed box she had received as a gift from Zeus. There was an exception. It was when she was with Wu-1. I want to go back, but... He had no time to comfort Pandora, who was sobbing. There was no time for that, and the situation was not good. Thud, Heracles stopped in his tracks. It was because of the outers he encountered while running to get over the wall. The atmosphere of the rough desert. Predator of the worshippers. Source of impure pollution. Opening square bracket dot closing square bracket. Is it because he had been with them for so long and had heard countless names through Wu-1? He could see the names of the outers spread out before him. You're not going to let us go, are you? Groan. Heracles clenched his fists and lowered Pandora, who he had been carrying over his shoulder. We have to break through. Rest here. Rumble. Lightning erupted from Heracles' fist. From now on, time was of the essence. If a battle had started inside the tower, he had to hurry over there. There was no time to spare magic power. Crack, crackle. The power of lightning is embedded in your arm. The power of a giant is embedded in your body. The release of lightning that was carried out simultaneously with the activation of the giant transformation. Rumble, rumble. Dozens of lightning spears rose around Heracles, and his eyes and hair turned golden. Heracles is now a demigod and a hero. It was the ideal being that Zeus had wanted to create. Me too. Swish. And in front of such a Heracles. I will help. Pandora, who had barely regained her composure, began to move as if she had made up her mind. Fortunately, the trembling had stopped, and she did not say anything about going back. Even so, it was a place where one more hand was needed. There was no reason to refuse. Let me tell you in advance, if you insist on fighting, I can't protect you. You don't have to. Okay, if that's the case. Thud, rumble, rumble, with a step forward. Boom, boom, boom. The sand of the desert turned upside down, and Heracles was thrown forward. Let's break through. They're coming. Odin, who happened to be watching Sun Ogong, reached out his hand at his muttering. Swish. Odin grabbed Gingnir, which he had placed on the floor. He shouted at the top of his lungs. The enemy is coming. Zing. Odin's voice was magically transmitted beyond the horizon. And as soon as Odin's voice fell, ooh, ah, ka, all sorts of sounds, such as screams, cries, and lamentations, began to be heard from beyond the horizon. Finally, is it starting? Gulp. The rankers who had gathered in their seats due to tension clenched their hands. They, too, had lived as rankers for hundreds or thousands of years and had experienced countless battles. They had overcome the crisis of death several times, so not many of them were afraid of it. However, they could not understand the beings that were swarming in the purple waves that had not yet entered their field of vision. Squirm. The huge and great beings that had entered from outside the tower. Waves of tens of thousands or hundreds of millions that were hard to see and understand with the eyes. Aha, I've heard rumors, but what the hell, what are we going to do with something like that? Thud. Players who had just been overwhelmed by the atmosphere sat down one by one. In order to secure more combat power, players from the upper floors had been brought here, but it seemed that even standing at this distance was burdensome to them. Fear of battle, regret at having come here for nothing. Hesitation about whether to run away now. All sorts of complicated thoughts began to swirl in their heads. And among them, the dissatisfaction of those who had been forcibly dragged here by Son Goku could only be greater. We have to fight something we don't even know. Is this really a fight we can win? It might be better to fight Qian Dizong. Peek, peek. Odin's expression became serious as he watched the rankers exchange glances. This is serious. The atmosphere had been bad from the start. Of course, it was a natural reaction. Especially for those who were facing the outers for the first time, it was not unreasonable for them to react this way. Nevertheless, the atmosphere had to be changed. For that, bang, whoosh, a strong wind swept across the battlefield at that moment. Some of the nervous rankers were startled and raised their hands to protect their heads. What had happened? Fortunately, it was just a natural wind caused by something moving quickly. What the heck is there? The rankers stirred and pointed at the sky. A straight white line across the sky. It was Goku's somersault cloud. The somersault cloud moved so far away that it was out of sight in an instant. At the same time, thwack, a giant Rui Jingu bang bounced off the outers that were rushing in front of them. Son Goku's imposing aura, who had jumped into the chaotic and dangerous battlefield alone, could be heard far and wide. This is the last chance. A voice unlike Son Goku's, with no hint of a smile. So don't be scared, damn it. Bang, the Rui Jingu Bang rose so high that the distance made it look small. However, even from that distance, Son Goku's desperate cry could be heard clearly. Cheek, that damn monkey. The corners of Odin's mouth turned up. There were quite a few rankers here who were dissatisfied with Son Goku, who had dragged them here half forcibly. However, Son Goku had jumped into the battlefield before anyone else, erasing half of their dissatisfaction. This is the last chance. Odin knew Son Goku. He knew that he had fought with U1 in the future, and that he had ultimately lost. That's why he was here now. To win from them. To turn defeat into victory. He did a good job. He had perfectly cut off the beginning of the battle. From now on, it was his role to lead the flow of the battlefield. Thud. Odin's foot hit the ground. A large amount of magic power was transmitted through the ground. First, Son Goku's, then Odin's presence was imprinted in everyone's minds. At the same time, the power of Yggdrasil is embedded in the ground. The power of all Asgards is amplified. A blue light enveloped the land of Asgard, the tree that could be said to be the source of Odin's power. The world that made up this land itself. Yggdrasil's power gradually took hold in the bodies of the rankers standing on the ground. In addition to that, the King of Asgard commands the battlefield. Resistance to negative effects is successful. Allied damage is reduced by 20%. Some of the damage is taken instead of the ally. King of Asgard, the power of myth and divinity that Odin had written down over many years, obtained after passing the 100th floor's trial. Believe in me, everyone. Odin's words were not as loud or thunderous as Son Goku's. Just as the volume of one's voice does not represent all of one's strength. From now on, you are all Asgard. At Odin's next words, the battlefield became one. Chapter 512. Flash. The flaming golden eyes flared up. His vision seemed to ripple dizzily, then expanded as if he had hundreds of eyes, taking in everything on the battlefield at a glance. Sun Wukong, who had been brandishing the Rui Jingu Bang, suddenly staggered. The top-ranking skill coveted by countless rankers, flaming golden eyes. Eyes that could see through the truth and perceive the world at a glance. To put it simply, flaming golden eyes was something close to maximizing the power of eyes. That was why Sun Wukong felt the urge to gouge out his own eyes at this moment. Splash! Sun Wukong jumped into the purple waves. Something grabbed his ankles with great force. Sun Wukong's gaze dropped down. At some point, the ground had turned into a muddy, murky swamp. Sun Wukong's eyes showed the name of the creature. Unclean and contaminated disease. Both. Hundreds, thousands of arms stretched out from the ground. The hands pulled Sun Wukong deeper into the swamp. Both. A swamp with a name that meant unclean and contaminated disease, and a color that was just as foul. Sizzle. A hot and unpleasant sensation as his ankles melted away. If it had been ordinary rankers and not Sun Wukong, they would have sunk into the swamp on the spot and their entire bodies would have melted away into poison. However, screech. Light burst forth from Sun Wukong's head. Magic power surged up through the Rui Jingu Bang he was holding in his hand. The Rebel of Heaven begins. The heavenly pilgrimage begins. The Monkey King, the stories that Sun Wukong had lived through until now. The myths began to shine. And those names became intertwined. The journey to the west begins. Finally, it was born as one complete myth. Stretch. Whoosh. The Rui Jingu Bang was enveloped in magic power. Rui as you wish. Boom. Whiz. The Rui Jingu Bang, extended as Sun Wukong willed it, cut through the swamp. No. Clang. Clang, clang. From the beginning, it seemed that the Rui Jingu Bang wasn't just aiming at the swamp. It split the ground in two, and along with several mountains, it cut down thousands of outers. That single blow was enough to boost the morale of the allied forces who were fighting with Sun Wukong in the lead. Monkey, even Asura, who had joined the fight not as a guild but as an individual. Indeed, he lives up to his name. Cheonmai and Cheonmujin, who were watching the scene together. He's become quite the monster. Even Odin, who was commanding the battlefield. Surprised by the single blow Sun Wukong had shown, they paused for a moment. The trace of the Rui Jingu Bang that had created the swamp and the ground was closer to the trace of a sword than a staff grate. Buzz. The Rui Jingu Bang returned to Sun Wukong's hand. Sun Wukong, who had driven Aboth's swamp underground, jumped up into the air with a few steps in the void. His eyes turned white. Sun Wukong roared, "Rumble." He extended his fist and swung the Rui Jingu Bang. If both hands were not enough, he kicked with his legs, and if that was not enough, he bit with his teeth. Crunch, boom, screech. Sun Wukong's eyes turned red as he tore off the outer skin with his teeth. A conversation he had had with a man not long ago came to his mind. Are you a demon who wants to live like a human? The man had a shaved head and a mole or wart on his forehead. He had introduced himself as Tripitaka, the myth that Sun Wukong had achieved. The beginning of the journey to the west and the owner of the scriptures. It wasn't the first time they had met. Sun Wukong had met him in the future as well. But somehow, even though they were the same person, the koan that Samjang posed was completely different from that time. Do you know that is greed? Monk Samjang. He saw through Sun Ogong. He brought up the vow that he had buried deep down in his heart since long ago, since he was born and raised in Wagasan, in front of Sun Ogong and asked him about it. Do you really want to live as a human? Sun Ogong's answer to that question had already been decided a long time ago. Of course, I see, nodding his head as if he knew it would be like that, Samjang. However, that was not all that he knew. Because of that, your comrades may die. Sun Ogong's eyes shook for the first time. Eyes that saw through everything. Those eyes were unpleasant, but Sun Ogong never avoided them. Don't you know, you can't live as a human just because you want to live as a human. Your nature is not something that you can change with your behavior or expression. Monk Samjang's words stabbed Sun Ogong's heart. He wanted to deny it and cover his ears, but Sun Ogong didn't do that. This was something that he had to listen to. This is just a test. Everything was a process that he had to endure and overcome. Snap. Hey, you bald bastard, what do you know? It was a process, but, even so, he lacked the patience to endure the irritation that was boiling up inside of him. Still, they say that if you endure the character, tolerate, patience 3 times, you can even avoid murder. Sun Ogong, who didn't even know how to write the word patience, barely managed to stop his fist from flying out. I'm not going to live as a monster. Not me, and not my brother either. Are you going to live while suppressing your nature? I've never thought about it like that. No, you have thought about it that way. I'm not a monster, I'm a human. I'm different from them. I'm not a monster that rips flesh, digs out organs, and drinks blood. Samjang's eyes softened. Do you really not think that way? Kwajik. Sun Ogong's mind briefly returned to reality. The long, sharp tentacles stuck in his back. It was a change caused by the shock. However, the voice that drove him into a corner still lingered in his head. That's just self-suggestion. You don't want to live that way. With humans, with family, with friends. Family, friends. Those soft and warm words had always followed Sun Ogong. There was no such thing for monsters. No, it couldn't be. Even though you want that, the fact that you enjoy fighting is just the bare minimum instinct that you can't suppress. Shing, quadududude. The fingernails that Sun Ogong swung tore the tentacles and the outers connected to the end of them to shreds. Sharply bent fingernails. Those fingernails left a clear mark in the air. But you know, shut up. Will you be able to avoid regretting the fights that you will face in the future? I told you to shut up. Pput. Sun Ogong gritted his teeth. The sound of his teeth grinding echoed in his ears. His eyes turned white, and the desire to kill or tear something apart squirmed inside him. Swish. He gripped the Ruyi Bang tightly. I am Sun Ogong. The great sage, heaven's equal. The monkey from Wagasan. He recalled the countless names that he called himself in his head. If he didn't, the fingernails that were directed at them would soon turn towards the rankers behind him. You are a monster, Ogong. A voice that called him familiarly. But those words pierced Sun Ogong's heart more than any other words. Accept it. If you don't, you will just stay in that place. Gulp. As the sharp fangs pierced his lips, blood flowed out. With that pain, Sun Wukong barely managed to regain his clouded mind and muttered. I also know. Those were the words he couldn't answer back then. But that's not fun. He knew that he wanted to live as a human, not a monster. Monster. They were beings who existed between humans and demons, commonly known as a type of monster in this world. But not all of them were like that. Sun Wukong and Wuma Wong. There were those who lived among humans like them, not as monsters. However, don't you want to win? At those words from Samjang, Sun Wukong could no longer be stubborn. If you lose, you have nothing. He regretted it. Even if he had made the same choice in the future as he did now. He might not have been able to win, but he might have been able to live longer. That's why it was even more so. Sun Wukong had no choice but to be desperate. Kua, tearing with his nails and swinging the Ruyi Jingu Bang. It was simple, but Sun Wukong did not rest. Kwajik. The fight was fierce and even brutal. His companions watched the fight. Ashura felt awe for the first time in his life as he watched the sight. What kind of fight is that? Gulp, sweat beaded on the four hands that gripped the sword. The two Ashuras watching Sun Wukong's fight had the same look in their eyes at this moment. There was a guy who fought like that too. The first head opened its mouth. The second head also had the same impression. Ashura knew his own abilities well. He admitted to himself that he was inferior to beings like Cheon-dae-seong, Heracles, and Odin. However, Ashura had never respected or looked up to any of them. Until this moment, I don't want to lose. Then hurry up and move. Don't be lazy. Fine, Ashura nodded at the first head's nagging. Soon, a red aura rose like a wave behind him and the new body disappeared. Ashura was not the only one who was stimulated. Kwa Wu. Iliang Jingun created a strong wind pressure by swinging the Aeon Waldu. He looked at Sun Wukong while swinging the Aeon Waldu. You've gone too far. It was a story that he could still remember as if it was in his hand. For him, who had existed since ancient times, the battle between monsters and the heavens, including Cheon-dae-seong, was not a very distant story. At that time, Iliang Jingun fought Sun Wukong for several days. However, Sun Wukong then and now were completely different people. On the other hand, Wuma Wong looked away from such Sun Wukong. Finally, he thought that this moment would come eventually. However, when that time finally came, he couldn't help but feel complicated. Wuma Wong looked up at the sky. Sun Wukong was still fighting. Kwa. Sun Wukong, who had exerted all his magical power, exhaled roughly. From the beginning until now, Sun Wukong had fought more enemies than anyone else. Phew, huff, the Hua and Jiamzhong was still not extinguished. Sun Wukong's gaze swept over his surroundings. The outers that filled the sky. He had barely cleared the ground, but that too was only for a moment. Uduk. Sun Wukong was fighting against two things. The outers, the enemy of this fight. And himself, the monster that was wriggling inside. Yes, I admit it, he couldn't afford to lose this fight as powerlessly as before. He had now accomplished the myth of the journey to the west and was released from the seal of the great sage, equaling heaven. It didn't matter if he couldn't go back to the way he was before. I am, red and gold, eyes with two colors coexisting. Sun Wukong opened his eyes wide and spoke as if making a pledge. A monster. Chapter 513. In a dark room. In the royal palace of Asgard, where the sky had turned purple, a man with wrinkles all over his face was asleep. A sage who had gained wisdom beyond compare in lieu of sleeping for most of his life. Mimir, having lost both of his eyes that contained his abilities, he had been demoted from being disqualified as a high ranker to being among the lower ranks. There were two reasons. Firstly, Mimir's power after losing both of his eyes was far inferior to before. Secondly, it was because it was impossible to know whether his slumber due to the curse of knowledge would last for 1,000 years or 10,000 years. However, thud, contrary to the expectations that he might sleep forever. Mimir's lips moved slowly. That day has come. His eyes did not open. No, there was no need to. Even if he opened his eyelids, he wouldn't be able to see anything anyway. A pitch-black field of vision. Accepting that there was no longer any light in his world, Mimir rose from his seat. Creak, he could feel the castle of Asgard shaking. He couldn't see with his eyes, but it wasn't as if his five senses had all dulled. Slowly heading towards the window, Mimir staggered and listened to the sounds. Save me, Kulan, damn it, support this side too. It's busy here too, Og. The sound of screams and blood splattering. And the sound of something bursting or tearing apart. The scent of the battlefield wafted even this far. And amidst it, there were familiar cries mixed in. For Asgard, Odin, the cries of Odin, who commanded Asgard, echoed in his ears. From the direction the voice came from, he could even feel the energy of Gingnir being activated. It meant that the situation wasn't easy enough to spare Gingnir. This was the first time he had woken up without him being there. Odin was always guarding beside his bed when he was about to wake up. Reading a book, or dozing off while sitting, lightly greeting him asking if he had woken up. It was both regretful and, in a way, fortunate. I can't see him anymore. It had been a year since he had woken up. It was a record. Did he ever think he would regain consciousness this quickly? He had no choice but to. Because only he in this world knew that this would be the last time. In this world, that is. A smile hung on Mimir's lips. There was no regret. He had lived this moment too many times to have such a thing. Perhaps it was from the moment he first met you one. There was only one way to win. We can't win with just us. He had no choice but to accept that fact, and if so, this was the only way. Whoosh! Mimir's body slowly began to scatter. Feeling his fingertips disappearing as they turned into dust, Mimir muttered. It doesn't hurt as much as I thought. Perhaps because he had been drawing this moment for a long time. It was terribly painful to be scattered as dust, but the determination he had made for a long time made him overcome even that pain. He lost both eyes. Now, all that remains is the body. If I give up this too, what awaits me after that is probably complete annihilation. Nevertheless, anyway, I'm glad I succeeded. Mimir exhaled with relief rather than regret or fear in his words. Indeed, it was unknown whether this would put an end to the fight with victory. But at least it increased the odds of winning a little more. That alone was enough for Mimir to feel that he was sacrificing himself. Odin, my friend, towards the distant battlefield that was invisible. Don't be too angry. Mimir spat out his last remaining words. Susus. The commander of the battlefield was usually in the rear. The death of the commander often leads directly to the defeat of the war. Therefore, the commander takes maximum safety and leads the battlefield to victory. However, this fight could not be won that way. That's why Odin stepped forward. As a warrior of Asgard. And as the king who commands the battlefield. Asgard. For Asgard. Odin's cry was answered by the rankers of Asgard, including Valkyrie. But that's it. Morale was dwindling. It couldn't be helped. The outers in front of me were so difficult to handle that each and every one of them was difficult to handle unless they were high-ranking. There is something that cannot be helped by skill or the power of myth. The myth that Odin achieved, the king of Asgard, boosts the power and morale of his allies. At the same time, it partially compensates for their damage. There was a small penalty, but on such a large battlefield, it could be called a fraudulent force. But that wasn't enough. Now, a visible change in the battlefield was needed. So, Ku Gu Gu Gu, Gingnir, clenched in Odin's hand, started up. How many times was this? Is it the fourth? Gingnir requires enormous magical power to start up once. That's why even Odin refrained from starting Gingnir more than twice if possible. However, 4 times. This was a new record. Flash. Gingnir, which left Odin's hand, cut through the battlefield. Quang, a violent roar of air being pierced. Torn apart by a swarm of pure white light, the pieces of the lifeless outers fell to the ground. In an instant, all eyes were focused, and once again the eyes of the rankers widened. Gingnir, how many shots is this? Is it 4? The 4th shot had already been fired. Every time Gingnir started up, the situation on the battlefield changed. The overwhelming blow that pierced everything that passed through a vast area boasted an overwhelming force. Ku Gu Gu Gu, the trace of Gingnir piercing and flying remained intact on the battlefield. A circular void emerged among the outer ones, who were surging in like waves of violet, and a pure white line was drawn where the spear had passed. For a moment, the atmosphere of the battlefield changed. Gingnir's single strike possessed enough power to do that. However, thud, Odin hurriedly wiped the blood flowing from his nose and steadied his unsteadily swaying body. King of Asgard, leads the battle. Partially replaces the damage to the friendly forces. Zing, a shock ran through his head. Mental and physical damage were inflicted simultaneously. No matter how many layers of magic he used to protect his body, it was not enough. Not now. He barely managed to straighten his body, which had become like a rag. He knew that he would definitely fall someday. But it shouldn't be now. If possible, it had to be later, even a second later. King Odin, he was like the spiritual pillar of this tower. Odin, my friend, it was then. A familiar voice reached Odin's ears as he barely managed to stop the bleeding from his nose and regain his senses. Mimir. Odin turned his head abruptly, his voice filled with disbelief. Asgard's royal palace. His old friend, who was sleeping alone in it. He had already awakened from his sleep. It seemed like he should welcome him with open arms. What are you trying to do? At that moment, Odin could not erase the anxiety that was sprouting strongly within him. Mimir's curse was not ordinary. The curse of wisdom. It was an irresistible power gained in exchange for drinking from the well of Yggdrasil, which could be said to be the foundation of Asgard. Furthermore, Mimir had now lost both of his eyes, which were like the source of his power. Despite that, the fact that he had suddenly awakened like this, "Don't be too angry," meant that another variable had arisen. Swish. In Odin's senses, which were all over the place, he could see Mimir's existence disappearing far away. His whole body was frozen and he could not run. By the time he found Mimir, most of his existence had already disappeared. Haha, Odin laughed in frustration. Mimir had vanished. It was no laughing matter. Nevertheless, he forced himself to laugh because of Mimir's last words. My friend. He felt resentment for why he had done that. And a farewell. He could not ask why he had not said anything. There was no one to ask, and he knew why. Mimir was a smart friend. If the price of the plan he had made was complete annihilation beyond his eyes, Odin would never have cooperated. No, he might have even tried to interfere. Mimir might have foreseen that far. Why don't you say anything? Kim Yu-won. I knew that he had come back from the future, and after knowing the situation of the future through him. Odin felt sorry that Mimir knew this fact before him and asked. Is there a reason why you can't tell me? Why? Because we can't do anything about it. So you're just going to sit still? This guy, deceive the deceiver. Of course I didn't believe that there was nothing I could do. I thought he was hiding something. But because I trusted him, I didn't ask for details. But this is the result. When I first met you and now, you're a crazy guy. I'm Odin. I first met Mimir in the tutorial. I'm Mimir. That's better than this. Do you want to go together? And the moment Odin reached out to Mimir, he thought that was the beginning of Asgard. The two, who teamed up together, fought their first battle. Odin was interested in the flashy skills Mimir used, such as fire and ice. What was that just now? It's called magic. Magic. You use a spear, don't you? Yes, but I'm a little interested in that too. As a child, Odin was interested in everything. Mimir's magic was very appealing to him, who was training with a spear as a weapon. Would you like to learn? You mean that magic? Yes, it was from that day. Odin had never been apart from Mimir. Even when he knew he would be trapped in the curse of knowledge, Odin cheered him on when he drank the water from the spring of Yggdrasil. It was the same this time. I don't know what you're preparing for, but it can't fail. Nodding his head, Odin barely calmed his mind. Mimir, my one and only friend who is older than Asgard. If that's what he chooses, I respect it. Didn't he tell me not to get mad? Odin nodded his head. I had no intention of cursing, and I didn't feel like getting angry as I was worried. This time, the guy thought wrong. Don't be too lonely. Odin was not angry. Rather than getting angry, it might have been a good thing. Gulp. Odin moved deeper towards the center of the outer. Unbeknownst to him, Gungnir, which had been thrown with all his might, came back into his hand. He grabbed Gungnir and took in the huge battlefield unfolding before his eyes. Mimir is dead. No, not only that, countless rankers were already dying. Cheese. Odin took another step. Starting Gungnir, he thought. There was no such thing as a war where everyone could survive. Someone had to die, or everyone had to die. So who will die and who will survive in this fight? Among them, for now, Mimir, and me, these two have been confirmed. Thud. No longer stopping the flowing nosebleeds, Odin muttered with his blue eyes shining. I'll follow you soon, my friend. Chapter 514. How much time had passed? It wasn't something that could be measured in hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. An old shack. Azathoth lived in a house in the middle of a desert. Two people lived there. No, one person and a goat. Where are you going? Azathoth answered Shub-Niggurath's question. It seems someone is calling for me. He reached out and opened the old, rusty door. The outside scenery was clearly visible. The sky and the ground. Everything had turned purple. As I thought. Purple. Have they gathered? It was Yog-Sothoth's color. Goo. Numerous outer gods gathered into one. And among them was Yog-Sothoth. Azathoth knew what would happen next. Shuaik. Puk. A sharp, rough horn stabbed him in the back. Duke. Azathoth's body shook. Shub-Niggurath's arm transformed into a long, giant horn and pierced Azathoth's body from behind. Jaruk. Blood flowed out of his mouth. Azathoth had known this would happen, but he didn't avoid this moment. Instead, Azathoth raised his head and looked up at the sky. What is it that you're so dissatisfied with, Sothoth? Ooh, the nebula in the sky shook violently. Yog-Sothoth. It was the name of the sky that was always above his head. Are you trembling again? The sky that had been given a name had gained emotions. Sothoth had the greatest and most magnificent name. It was a name given with the meaning of controlling all beings as the sky of this world. He was the sky of the world and the emptiness where there is no existence. Originally, the sky was something that could be seen everywhere but existed nowhere. Aren't the names you gave us everything? Are you envious of this? Azathoth smiled faintly. He still had plenty of names left. And those in front of him coveted those names. Why were they so greedy? Was it just because they were afraid? What good would it do to have greater power? Didn't I tell you to ask? If you had, I would have given it to you. The event horizon, the foolish chaos, the formless chaos, are they all just words? How greedy. The names he mentioned were all names with great power, even among the names Azathoth possessed. It was practically a declaration of war, as if he wanted to take all his names. Azathoth had already made up his mind. If he hadn't, he would have taken back all the names they had at this place. What do you plan to do with those names? Yog-Sothoth had no answer. Instead, he threatened Azathoth by moving countless stars. Did he mean to say that he should hand over his name instead of talking nonsense? How ridiculous. Seeing him act like this, he realized that he didn't know anything. Right now, at this moment, Azathoth could take back all of their names, but take them. Azathoth didn't do that. He couldn't take back the names he had given them. Being alone again was something he didn't even want to imagine. As Azathoth said, Sothoth and the other outer gods tore his body apart. They ravenously devoured the names in his flesh and threatened each other to satisfy their greed. And even as his name was being taken away, he still won't answer. Azathoth stared at Sothoth, who was looking down at him from the sky. He still didn't tell him what he planned to do with his name. Yuan's eyes contained stars. Those stars continued to fall even now. If he were to be captivated by their beauty, he would probably be crushed by their power. Chu-chu-chu-chut. Formless chaos resides in the sword of another world. Divine power is amplified by the sword of another world. The names of power reside at the tip of the blade. Yuan She as gleamdred. Among the stars reflected in the flower offer Eshe, a line was drawn. Bendum. Clang. He held the sword and twisted his wrist ever so slightly. He imagined himself cutting through the sky and slashed the air space. Screech. In the blink of an eye, the sky was rent asunder. The stars that had been pouring down as if time stopped ceased their movement, and a black line was dragged across the sky. It looked as two halves of the world had been separated. But this blade's movement did not stop there. Formless chaos, powers are amplified. The durability of the sword of another world is being rapidly consumed. Su. Though rare sighting at the tip of the blade amplified further. The effect of the sword of another world was to amplify divine power. But, even an attempt created by the master craftsman Hephaestus found it difficult to amplify Azathoth's power. However, thanks to that zap, he was able to unleash several more attacks like the one just now. Screech. Several black lines were drawn across the sky. The lines that seemed to have an endless length cut through the sky and connected to the ground, splitting the desert in half. Thud, thud, thud. All of the stars fired by Yog-Sothoth were executed began to fall. The Debrisoft stars fell Ikawater fall. Yuan received all the debris with his entire body and glanced at the sword in his hand. I'm glad I can at least do say like this. Hephaestus' face gammatomand. The sword of another world was the masterpiece created by the two Hephaestuses. And it is clearly struggling to hold on, or perhaps it's a miracle that it's able to withstand Azathoth's power. Yuan, who had been murmuring in regret, looked up. So, what are you going to do? Yuan Sheas got the figure of a human rippling with purpura. Yog-Sothoth, who had been firing stars in the universe ever since the fight began, had only a few stars remaining. Yog-Sothoth, out of all his countless names, he held some of the greatest names. The event's conclusion, the void where existence does not exist. The sky of the world. Kugugugugu. The names that Yog-Sothoth possessed pressed down on the desert. As the boundless gravity poured down, Yuan realized that Yog-Sothoth had changed his method of fighting and smiled. So, that's what you're thinking. Yuan's back began to bend little by little. After firing stars, he was now changing the gravity. His way of fighting was indeed different from that of a normal being. Yog-Sothoth's power was close to omnipotence. But, and that. It's also necessary to look back and see a while. The same went for the name, Azathoth. Puak. A hand came out of Yog-Sothoth's form. The Thans hook Yog-Sothoth's power. Kugugugugu. The gravity that had been pressing down on Yuan's body gradually faded. Yuan looked at the identity of the arm appearing behind Yog-Sothoth. Well done. His lips curled up into a smile. Dan-ah. The name of Azathoth, formless chaos, took on a definite form without being defined. Dan-ah, who had always been in the form of a child, had now transformed into the form of an adult. Dan-ah. It was the first name Yuan had given. Originally, Dan-ah was going to be Azathoth. The one who hatched it up to be a child from the palm of his hand, who had now become an adult. It was a change that had occurred as the name Yuan held grew larger. After all, she was the main body of formless Chaos. Formless chaos opposes the void where existence does not exist. The formless chaos opposes the emptiness of non-existence. Sutsu, Sutsuatsu. As Yog-Sothoth and Danpung clashed, divine power scattered like sparks around them. The two names struggled to devour each other. Formless chaos and the emptiness of non-existence. Neither name had a clear form. Wah, Danpung's body scattered in all directions. The vast chaos swallowed Yog-Sothoth's emptiness. The emptiness, having lost its stars, began to resist Danpung by expanding its purple aura. Sutsuatsu, Sutsu, Kururung. The atmosphere distorted, and time and space warped. Anything caught in it, even the hardest metal, would be reduced to a tiny dot on the verge of annihilation. Furthermore, Wung, tiny dots emerged from Yog-Sothoth's blurry form. Yuan's eyes narrowed. It was the power of the world sky. With that name, Yog-Sothoth could endlessly regenerate nebulae and combine them into one. As expected, I won't be able to end this at this rate. The battle had been going on for days. Neither of them were running out of energy, and it seemed like they could fight forever at this rate. They wouldn't reach a conclusion by just clashing head-on. Are you still not showing yourself? Yog-Sothoth. Yog-Sothoth, who had been pouring out stars from the nebulae, hadn't uttered a single word until now. As if he was being cautious about every word he spoke. Yuan seemed to know what Yog-Sothoth was wary of. He was afraid of Azathoth. Despite taking most of that name for himself. The one and the all and the one. As Yuan began to speak, Yog-Sothoth's form began to tremble slightly. Key. It sounded like a door creaking open. A small door in the small universe that was trembling began to slowly open. You were deceived by that childish wordplay and tried to become everything yourself, you pitiful name. Creak. Yog-Sothoth's form continued to distort and tremble. How long are you going to hide in there? It was a provocation. Telling him to come out quickly without being scared. Crackle, crackle. The gauntlet in Yuan's hand, Uranus, heart, glowed. Black lightning wrapped around his hand. Lightning, created using the power of Tartarus, wrapped around Yuan's hand and body. Come out and devour me. Then this name will also become yours, as you wish. You don't know. A voice leaked out from the door that had opened wide inside Yog-Sothoth. How much we feared you. Feared me. What, didn't you say it yourself? The one and the all and the one. Wung. The nebula shook. The door inside it opened wide, and finally, the event horizon revealed itself. We know. It was a familiar face. He definitely didn't look like that before. No, Yog-Sothoth didn't have a form in the first place. He was the sky. He was an existence that was everywhere but nowhere. But, that we are ultimately just figments of your story. You, Yog-Sothoth, who had been like that, appeared before Yuan with a proper form. Yuan opened his mouth as he looked at Yog-Sothoth, who had revealed himself from the door. You have become what I wanted to be. Yog-Sothoth, who had come out of the door. He had the same face as Azathoth from long ago. Chapter 515. Yuan looked at Sotos with complicated eyes. He felt complicated when he saw him with the same face as him. I was curious, why did the guy covet his name so much? As he had enough power, Azathoth knew how futile it was, so he was even more curious. But, it was just this. Just, you say, Yog-Sothoth. He, who had Azathoth's face, opened his mouth with a resentful expression, completely different from Azathoth's. You don't know how great you are. What kind of name is as-filled square those, which is difficult to even mention. Thud. Sotos took a step closer. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The desert shook. Following the sky, Sotos tried to make the ground his territory as well. So now put it down. That name is not something that a human like you can have. A human like you. It meant you won. Sotos knew too. The fact that Azathoth was not a single being, but was passed down as a name. Quote. How arrogant, Sotos. Compassion was reflected in Yuan's eyes. Do you think of me as an enemy? Is that even a question? Yog-Sothoth. Come to think of it, he had been like that since he first received the name from Azathoth. Even without it, the high and mighty sky was always envious and hostile toward Azathoth, who had more names than him after receiving the name. That's why Azathoth didn't consider his betrayal to be that much of a surprise either. But if so, it was even more disappointing. But it's strange. With compassionate eyes, Yuan asked. But why do you keep elevating me like this? As an enemy, why? Thud. Yuan took a step closer to Sotos. Sotos flinched. Yuan made fun of him. You're still afraid of me. Lowering yourself and elevating me. You still evaluate yourself as below me. That's not. Appearances don't matter. Phew. The trembling ground calmed down. What matters is the essence. Azathoth's presence enveloped the desert that had been taken over by Sotos. The suppressed land gradually became as calm as a gentle lake, and ripples appeared on Sotos' face. Did you think anything would change if you changed your appearance so much? Did you think you would become something if you collected a lot of names? Hasn't it changed? You can't even say my name properly. Sotos' eyes wavered. Obviously, he couldn't even say the name, Azathoth, properly just a moment ago. Sotos was shaken by Yuwon's criticize. He realized that he still felt a great distance from Azathoth, so much so that he couldn't even mention the name yet. You're afraid of me and yet you want to become me. What a joke. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. The desert turned black. The name Yuwon had threatened Yog-Sothoth. The difference in power wasn't that great. If they fought like this, the fight would never end. However, another variable emerged that surpassed that difference. Flap. Sotos took a step back. Looking down at his feet that had moved without his knowledge, Sotos shouted. No. Swish. Despite Sotos' resistance, the dark chaos that had begun to take over the desert did not stop. Before he knew it, chaos was consuming his body. Sotos couldn't even twitch in the dark chaos that enveloped his body. No, it's not. The corners of Yuwon's mouth went up. Trying to become Azathoth meant looking up to him. The moment he appeared before him with Azathoth's face, Yuwon felt both compassion and amusement. The moment you see your name is lower than mine, the up and down relationship is as good as set, isn't it? Sotos' eyes shook violently. Yuwon looked at him with compassionate eyes. Sotos. Foolish Sotos. A mournful call. Wu Yun was no longer looking at him. He had already lost his light, overshadowed by the name Azathoth. Instead, can't you see who's behind you now? What? Boo Wook. A pure white and transparent arm cut Sototh's body in half from behind. Wu Yun looked at Sototh with regret. Now I see you were just a puppet. That arm had been aiming for Sototh for a long time. Crouching, hiding in the darkness. With its teeth and claws hidden. Cheek, chi-gi-gi. Gi-ik. Sototh's body, with a face like his past self, was cracking. It wasn't a very pleasant sight, but he didn't feel like helping. Sototh was no longer interested in Wu Yun. Instead, he turned his head and glared at the owner of the arm that had pierced his body. I believed you, father. Flutter. Sototh's robe fluttered in anger. The eyes hidden in the shadows shone greedily. That you would do it. No one believed that Azathoth was alive. But one person was different. The youngest and most innocent, the one who had followed Azathoth so blindly that it was foolish, believed that Azathoth was alive. And now, this moment. Then thanks to you, towards the name that had been crushed by the name Azathoth, losing its power. Foolish chaos, reveals itself. I will accept it gratefully, father. The pure white mass with no facial features revealed its black teeth. Quack. To Wu Yun, he was more familiar with the name Foolish Chaos. Nyarlathotep. He savored the moment he had been waiting for so long. The sickly thin child held sand in his hand. How hungry was he? After a moment's thought, the child put the sand in his mouth and began to chew. Crunch. It was tasteless. The sand was hard and gritty, with no moisture whatsoever. Not to mention food, even water was hard to swallow with his parched throat. The child quickly spat out the sand. He thought he was crazy. The world was a desert, so why would he worry about starving if he could eat this? Nevertheless, the child could not give up his delusion. He was hungry. No, he wanted to live. Me. Quote. A goat bleated. The child swallowed his saliva at the thought of finding something to eat. If it was a goat, he could somehow eat it raw. That's what he thought. But, it's dry. On the hill of the desert. A man was looking down at him from beside the goat. His face was not visible in the light. But even so, the child looked at him as if he were possessed, instead of the goat beside him. His hunger pangs disappeared. He felt like he wouldn't be hungry if he was with the author. The child turned and began to follow the man. I will not give you anything to eat. It was what the child heard after following him for several days. He was not disappointed. He wouldn't give him food, but he couldn't give it to him. The child had never seen the man eat anything. Will you still follow me? Those words sounded like, aren't you going to leave me alone now? The child nodded. He still wanted to be by his side. Then he wouldn't be lonely, and he wouldn't be hungry. Okay, then do it. The man said so and started walking again. The child stared at his back for a while. Then, as if to say what are you doing, the goat next to him cried. Me. The child looked at the goat on his back. Wasn't its name Shubnigareth? The man sometimes seemed to talk to this guy. I'll go anyway. The child began to follow the man again. It had been a few days, a few months. Around the time when over a year had passed, the hunger began again. Gulp. Just where is the end of this road? With no destination in mind, I continued to follow behind, dragging my powerless body. I didn't have any thoughts anymore. The only thought that remained was that I absolutely could not lose him. That's how time continued to flow, and as I walked, supported by evil. Creak. The man walking ahead turned around. I've lost. The man approached slowly. The man bent his knees and met the child's eyes. For the first time, I didn't look up at him but faced him head on. I shall give you a name as well. Swish. The man reached out his hand. A name? What was that? The child had no concept of a name. That was obvious because it had never called out to anyone before. However, your name is Nyarlathotep. That is your name. Nyarlathotep. The moment it heard the name, the child understood immediately what it was. Nyarlathotep. 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 The child repeated its name over and over. Azathoth glanced at the child and began to walk again. With thoughts that the child was a being of unknown intentions. Azathoth no longer gave out names. There weren't many names left, but above all, the world was filled with names. The sky and the earth. Rocks and the wind, even a mere spark. Azathoth settled down in a small hut. Shubniggurath and Nyarlathotep were together in that hut. Now, no one could call Nyarlathotep a child anymore. It had a proper name, Nyarlathotep, and it had grown too big to be called a child. Of course, its featureless face remained the same. Father. Azathoth turned its head at Nyarlathotep's call. It still didn't like that title. I told you not to call me that. I thought you would. Then why do you keep calling me father? Didn't you give me my name? Quote quote. Azathoth turned its back on the wooden bed without saying a word at Nyarlathotep's response. Why did you call me? I just wanted to call you father. Is that really all? Beware of Yog-Sothoth. She is the same. Shubniggurath. She had been communicating a lot with Yog-Sothoth recently. It wasn't just those two. Everyone outside this small hut was the same. All of them were intoxicated by names and were drooling over the names that Azathoth had left. Even Shubniggurath, who was not present right now but lived together in this hut. What about you? Azathoth still had its back turned. Do you also need to be careful? Nyarlathotep hesitated to answer. Everyone in this world had turned their backs on Azathoth. Even Shubniggurath, whom it considered the closest. However, there was just one person in this world. I'm fine. There was only one person it was okay to show its back to. For now, I'm fine. Thud. Nyarlathotep, who had answered like that, covered its body with a worn-out cloth and turned its back on Azathoth. Nyarlathotep thought to itself, even if everyone in this world turns into your enemy, I won't. Even if this is a perfect chance to go for your neck, I won't. There's no need for that. Because you love us so much. Look, even now, aren't you showing your back, urging me to stab you in the back? Ah, my foolish, foolish father. There's no need to rush me. Didn't I tell you, I'm fine, because I can see further than that. Chapter 516. Quaduk, Quachik, Ododok. Dark chaos enveloped Yog-Sothoth's body. Soon, the sound of sharp teeth chewing on flesh and bone rang out from within the dark cocoon. Nyarlathotep greedily devoured Yog-Sothoth, revealing his gluttony. White, empty faces began to appear. He was different from Yog-Sothoth. He didn't fear the name of Azathoth, and naturally, he wasn't affected by it. He calls Azathoth his father, but he doesn't place him higher than himself, nor does he fear him. Nyarlathotep was the one who followed Azathoth more than anyone else. From a skinny, faceless little boy to this day, his world was filled with Azathoth. That guy, it was because of Nyarlathotep that this moment could exist. Was he waiting for this moment? How far into the future had he seen? He believed that Azathoth would live. He was convinced that he would appear someday and threaten Yog-Sothoth to take back his name. So he waited for this moment. The opportunity to take the names that Yog-Sothoth possessed. Over there or here, he's a consistent bastard. Yuan's gaze changed. The tone of his voice was the same. Yuan no longer saw him as Azathoth. Foolish chaos, Nyarlathotep. He was the one who had caused the most damage to himself in the tower, not only in the future but also in the present. Jaruk. Thud, thud. With unfocused eyes, Nyarlathotep raised his head, blood dripping from his lips. You're not the father I knew. Yuan let out a sigh at Nyarlathotep's words, who recognized his eyes at a glance. He didn't want to feel this way. Maybe it was because of Azathoth's memories, but he felt a strange affection for the guy he hated so much. You're the guy the first knew. Yuan, who had spoken without thinking, let out a sigh. No, you're not. He was still as sinister, but his appearance had changed a lot. The atmosphere he exuded was the same. Yuan's eyes flashed with fire. Since when, Jebuk? Taking a step towards Nyarlathotep, Yuan spat out his words with a sense of betrayal. Since when did you plan this moment? Betrayal. It was an emotion he could never feel. But now, Yuan asked as Azathoth. He had promised not to waver, but he couldn't help it. Azathoth loved Nyarlathotep more than any other name, and Yuan hated him more than anyone else. Suk. Nyarlathotep wiped the blood from his lips with his sleeve. He looked at Yuan with a complicated expression, just like Yuan. This is strange, it's confusing, a troubled expression. An expression on Nyarlathotep's face. Yuan realized once again that he had lived a long time. He had seen all of that guy's faces. Which side should I think of you as? The result won't change either way. If that's the case. Sick, the corners of his mouth rising all the way up to his ears. Think of it as the more comfortable side. He was definitely different from Yog-Sothoth. Was it because he had achieved all that he had set out to do, or was it because he had never had any respect for Azathoth in the first place? Unlike Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep did not place Yuan higher than himself. Since when? Well, honestly, it's a difficult question to answer. I'm not even sure when it started. After pondering for a moment, he answered as if he had just remembered. From the moment I first saw your back, I guess. My back. Yuan's expression hardened as he thought about when that was. Azathoth had first shown him its back long before it had given him the name, Nyarlathotep. Even when he was just a nameless, scrawny little kid, Azathoth had been guiding him. Could it have been from that time? Yuan asked, just in case. From the beginning, he had believed in and followed Azathoth more than anyone else. As such, Yuan had thought that he would have worried and struggled with his betrayal until the very end. But that wasn't it. To be exact, from the moment I was certain that its back was facing me. I thought this moment would come. My father would never die. It was you. At those words, Yuan became certain. The beginning of all of this was right before his eyes. Connecting Sotos and that harlot, making them distrust me. The one who started it all. I'm too late to know. Nyarlathotep raised his head. Then, he spoke to his father, who he had kept buried in his heart. My foolish and idiotic father. It was something he always said as if it were a habit. In the past, no one had understood what those words meant. No, everyone had been mistaken. A foolish father. Nyarlathotep's words were meant to mock Azathoth's foolishness for loving the world too much and losing it so easily. But, I won. The foolishness that Nyarlathotep spoke of wasn't that. He had been deceiving the one he had called his father for a long time. The reason he hadn't stabbed Azathoth in the back, like Shub-Niggurath had, was to create a more certain time. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The sky distorted. The extinguished lights turned back on one by one, and the name Yog-Sothoth once again hung in the sky. Stars twinkled brightly. World's sky forms a nebula. Yuan slowly opened his mouth as he watched Nyarlathotep, who had begun to control the stars. Isn't that it? Swish. Yuan lightly swung the sword in his hand. It wasn't a meaningful action. It was just an action he took to confirm with his sword that he was Yuan, not Azathoth, and to liven up the atmosphere. I killed you once. Crackle. Cracks appeared on Nyarlathotep's face. In the future you were in. You took Mimir's eye, so you must know. Yuan nodded as if it didn't matter. Rather, it was better if the story made sense. Unlike what you were waiting for there, Azathoth didn't appear. So this must be a change that happened when I came back. In the future that Yuan had been in, Nyarlathotep had died, and Yog-Sothoth had survived. The complete opposite of what was happening now. But that was why Yuan didn't think the current situation was so bad. But it won't change anything. You'll die by my hand this time too. Rumble. Sensory Zone is activated. Wangkumjang is activated. Eye of Prophecy is activated. Yuan's gaze changed. Kim Yuan and Azathoth. He didn't need to hesitate between the two this time. The one in front of him now wasn't Yog-Sothoth. Even if he had taken his name, his true name hadn't changed. His name was Nyarlathotep. He was an opponent that he had already defeated once. And so, Otherworld's nemesis targets, Nyarlathotep. Now was the time to fight as Kim Yuan, not Azathoth. We'll win this time. You dream too much. I've already done it, so I know. Nyarlathotep's brow furrowed at Yuan's mocking words. Nyarlathotep charged at Yuan as if to counter his words. It won't end with you defeating me here, will it? This time, Yuan's eyes wavered at those words. You know it well because you've experienced it. No, even if you don't know, I know it well. I have lived among them longer than any of you. How long did it take for Azathoth to die and be reborn from the egg? And how long has Nyarlathotep been searching for Azathoth in the tower? It was something that neither Yuan nor Azathoth could know. But presumably, that time would definitely not be shorter than Odin's age. Even if you defeat me, it won't be your victory. It will be your victory. Nyarlathotep said with confidence. You will win this time. That's ridiculous. You cannot defeat us. Yuan closed his eyes for a moment. Yes, his purpose here was not just to defeat Nyarlathotep and Yog-Sothoth. To save as many of his comrades as possible and to win this fight. As long as that was the ultimate goal, even if he managed to somehow defeat Nyarlathotep here, if the battle in the tower was lost, it would ultimately be a meaningless victory. However, we will win. Yuan's thoughts were different. The past battles unfolded in Yuan's mind. The outers that filled the sky and his comrades who had lost to them and were barely hiding, waiting for an opportunity. The destroyed future world, he had experienced that world and come here. The same was true for Son Goku. And Hercules, Odin, Mimir, everyone had grown their strength to avoid repeating the same thing that happened to them. My mind is unchanged. Putting aside all sorts of thoughts, he couldn't let his mind be confused by that snake-like tongue. So, we will win. For now, he had no choice but to believe. The blood and screams of the battlefield did not stop. Amidst the stench of blood and the unidentified stench emanating from the corpses of the outers, the shouts of encouragement, pain, and screams of fear continued without end. Save me, wounded. The wounded come this way. How can we take care of the wounded now? Little by little, the battlefield was tilting in an increasingly difficult direction. And the one who sensed this fact earlier than anyone else was none other than Odin. So many have died. He commanded this battlefield using the power of his myth, King of Asgard. Maybe that was why Odin could feel who died and who survived in this battle with his skin. Half of the Demon King was dead, and Diablo was burning the rest of his life force while fighting with his wounds. Half of Michael's wings had been torn off. Irene Khan, the leader of the heavenly army, had his annual blade broken in half, and he was wielding a sword that seemed to have come from nowhere. One of Asura's forearms had been cut off. Artemis wailed in the middle of the battlefield at the death of her older brother, Apollo. Hades circled around her to protect her as she held Apollo in her arms, half out of her mind. Creak. Odin gripped Gungnir in his hand. He, too, was reaching his limit. One more step. This one step would probably be the last one he could take. Just as Odin was about to throw his last spear towards the center of the battlefield. Flash. The sky turned golden. Rumble. A familiar sound of thunder. The moment the light and sound stimulated his eyes and ears, Odin stopped Gungnir's activation. Why are you late at a time like this? Contrary to his complaint, the corners of his mouth turned up. It was a sound that truly put his mind at ease. Boom. Quang. A single huge bolt of lightning struck the battlefield. Crackle, crackle, golden eyes and hair. From afar, one might have mistaken him for Zeus, but seeing the thick muscles all over his body, one would realize who it was. You're so late. Quang. Appearing with the thunder, he began to move. Hercules. Chapter 517. Crash. A giant mouth appeared before Heracles. A mouth that was trying to devour Heracles, revealing its gleaming white teeth. It was the hunger and gluttony. It had the status to devour even a high ranker in one bite. However, his opponent was Heracles. Thunder resides in the Yggdrasil's club. The giant's power resides in the arm. The hero of Gigantomachia resides in the arm. Flash. The club in Heracles' hand emitted a golden light. Kwaung. The mouth of the hunger and gluttony turned into black ashes and disappeared. Not only that, but the electric shock emitted through the club completely annihilated the outer races that were swarming in the sky. Thud. At the same time that the club released lightning, the ground shook. It wasn't a special skill or any kind of power. The sound of something heavy enough to shake the ground was approaching from afar. Is that a giant? Even if it's a giant, isn't that too big? It was the highest giant, a being with a body that pierced through the clouds and rose high into the sky. Even though the giant was walking from far away, there was no one who couldn't see it with the naked eye. The giant's size was so overwhelming that it could be felt from this distance. In fact, the giants standing on the battlefield, including the gigantes, who were the kings of the giants, looked like dwarfs in front of humans when compared to the highest giant. It was the moment when the tide, which had turned slightly in Heracles' favor, was reversed by a single being. Heracles. The giant had one goal. It was Heracles, who was sweeping through the battlefield. The giant stretched out its fist towards Heracles. Ackles. He was a being who changed the terrain just by walking. Depending on how he swung his hand, even a small island could disappear. If such a giant swung its fist, it would be common sense to avoid it. However, Kwaang, Heracles did not avoid the fist and took it head-on. Creak, crackle, Heracles' legs, which had taken the giant's fist with his body, did not break. Instead, the ground he was standing on sank deeply and a wide crater was created. But anyway, whoop, Heracles took the giant's fist with force. No, Kwaahk, it wasn't just taking it. Boo-wong. The giant's body flipped upside down and floated up. Heracles had lifted the giant up with all his might, holding the fist that had crushed his body tightly with both hands. The giant's power resides in both arms. Giant Slayer confronts the highest giant. Kwaahng. He threw the giant towards the direction where the outers were. A ray of light rose above the giant, who had lost its balance and crashed to the ground. Crackle, crackle. In an instant, Heracles' golden eyes, which had risen to the clouds riding the lightning, caught the body of the giant lying on the ground. The giant slowly got up, shaking its dizzy head. Towards the giant. Rumble, rumble, Heracles threw the lightning with all his might. Flash, Kwarung. The lightning that Heracles threw struck the giant's body. The lightning, which had the power to easily wipe out a city, was not something that even a giant with a huge body could easily withstand. Kuyu, Kwarung, Kwarung, Kwaung. The downpour of lightning from the sky. The moment the downpour of lightning stopped, Hercules' body fell vertically towards the giant. At that moment, a giant pillar of lightning rose high into the sky with a sound so loud that all other sounds around it disappeared. Rumble. Sun Ogong's body, which had been slaughtering the outers as a monster, was already half dead. No matter how strong he was, Sun Ogong did not form a team. No, he couldn't, because in Sun Ogong's current state, it was difficult to distinguish between friend and foe. Rumble. A pillar of light soared high into the sky. Its appearance could be seen with the naked eye even from the battlefield far away. Grr. Sun Ogong stopped fighting and bared his teeth. Numerous corpses were strewn around him. There were many living outers, but Sun Ogong's gaze was not directed at them. A pillar of lightning soared high into the sky, and the flow of magic power felt within it. Sun Ogong's interest had already shifted to that side. Grr. Sun Ogong's fingernails had grown to be nearly a foot long. The single remaining red pupil had turned half gold, making it look much closer to a monster. In an instant, Sun Ogong's murderous intent headed towards the pillar of light that was rising high. That was when, pull yourself together. Splat. Sun Ogong's hand instinctively went out at the voice coming from the side. A few drops of blood splattered on Sun Ogong's face along with the thinly sliced skin. If he hadn't dodged reflexively, his neck would have been cut into several pieces. However, Pandora, whose cheek had been cut, had a blank expression. Pull yourself together. A repetition of the same words. Sun Ogong's pupils, which had been torn lengthwise, widened greatly. As if he was gradually regaining his senses, Sun Ogong opened his lips and spoke. Pandora, Pandora, you idiot. Pandora reached out to Sun Ogong. It was obvious that he was not in his right mind. At this rate, there was no telling how much crazier he would get. But, idiot, did the word idiot touch a nerve? Clack, Sun Ogong gritted his teeth and reached out with even more anger. Idiot, swish, quack, the fingernails that were reaching out towards Pandora were blocked in the middle. A long, slender tree that rose from below stopped the hand that was piercing his eyes and head as if it was going to pierce them. Slurp, the tree climbed up Sun Ogong's hand and tied up his body. Are you okay? Pandora turned her head at the voice coming from the side. The one who had stopped Sun Ogong's hand was Vishnu, who had pale complexion and green hair that half covered his eyes. Pandora nodded. Except for a slight scratch on her cheek, she was not injured. I guess you can't tell friend from foe. He's that tired. Pandora looked at Sun Ogong with pitiful eyes. Sun Ogong, who was struggling to get out of the tree while making a loud noise. He had already killed the most outers at the very front of the battlefield. No matter how much magic power overflowed, and even if he used the power of a monster, his stamina could not be infinite. If he had been in perfect condition, Sun Ogong would not have been so futilely defeated, no matter how skilled Vishnu was. He'll be fine if he rests for a bit. Whether or not she knew that she had overcome a life-threatening crisis, Pandora's reaction was extremely calm. As expected, Sun Ogong, who had been tied to the tree for a while, soon stopped struggling and tilted his head. What is this? Sun Ogong turned his head at his own appearance, tied to a tree. He found Pandora and Vishnu and asked with a thought that he shouldn't have had. What did I do wrong? You just tried to kill her. Me. His eyes widened as if they were about to tear. Soon, Sun Ogong bowed his head deeply. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Despite Sun Ogong regaining consciousness, Pandora asked him for a favor. Vishnu nodded and released the skill that had been binding Sun Ogong. Sun Ogong sat on the floor, looking defeated. Vishnu looked away from him towards Pandora. Kim Yuan, where did that guy go? He had joined late, but he knew the situation to some extent. Yuan, Heracles, and Pandora had headed outside the tower. Vishnu didn't doubt how they had gotten there. After the battle had started, the three of them had disappeared. But two of them had returned. One person was missing. It was Yuan. He's still there. Why? He's fighting a monster. It was a vague answer. But Vishnu was convinced that Yuan was fighting. Well, he wouldn't be slacking off there. Up until now, Yuan had always fought in the most difficult places. For Yuan, who wouldn't show up in a war where everyone in the tower was fighting together, it meant that something big was happening. Kwau, Kugu, Kugugu. He could feel the electrifying magic power from afar, as well as the earthquake caused by Heracles, fists and club. Heracles, Heracles, Herak, Hera. The outer god's attention had shifted from Sun Ogong to Heracles. Vishnu clicked his tongue as he watched the purple slime pass by him. He's doing great on his own. He's not only taking on that giant by himself, but he's also changing the atmosphere of this vast battlefield. Heracles, the hero of Gigantomachia, the giant slayer, the successor of Zeus. He had many titles. He had actually been the fastest rising ranker after Yuan in recent years. But even so, Vishnu had never thought that Heracles would be at this level. He wondered if he was better than Zeus at handling lightning at this point. However, he's being reckless. Sun Ogong, who had been gloomy for a moment, grabbed his Ruyi Jingu Bang, which was rolling around on the floor, and looked in the direction of Heracles. He knows that the situation isn't good. He's trying to change it somehow. Reckless. Sun Ogong nodded. He had fought alongside Heracles with Yuan for a long time. As such, he knew Heracles' weakness is better than anyone. That guy never used to be like that. He's suddenly overflowing with magic power. It seems to be stronger than before, but a lack of magic power was his chronic problem that couldn't be fixed even after thousands of years. Heracles' strength was his unrivaled strong physique. With that alone, Heracles had become a ranker on par with the strongest in the tower, such as Yuan, Sun Ogong, and Odin. Now, with the power of lightning, he could use an attribute of magic power that he had been unable to use before, but the magic power he possessed wasn't at this level. No matter how great a skill he had acquired, he couldn't overcome the limits of his stats. Furthermore, he's already fought a lot on his way here. He had already fought a fair number of battles with Pandora on their way here. No matter how strong and resilient Heracles was, he couldn't avoid getting tired. He's probably struggling even now. Sun Ogong's expression turned serious at Pandora's words. He had started fighting since they had arrived here, but he had been fighting long before that. That guy, Gik. With that thought, Sun Ogong began to walk wearily. Does he want to die? Kwa rung. The thunder still continued without stopping. Chapter 518. Thud. Brunhild approached Odin and knelt beside him. She was in such a state that it was a miracle she had made it this far. Her armor was crushed in places, and her pale complexion looked like she could collapse at any moment. You've pushed yourself too hard. Who was that line for? Odin shook his head. I'm fine. Let me see your wounds. Wounds? What would those be? Wung. Brunhild's hand touched Odin's back. She tried to calm his agitated insides with her healing magic. But then, quote! Brunhild's eyes widened as if they were about to burst. As the leader of the Valkyries, she was not only skilled in swordsmanship but also as a commander and in healing. She was no archangel of the heavens, but she was more than capable of caring for the moderately wounded. The problem was Odin's condition. How are you still alive? Gulp. As if triggered by those words, blood poured from Odin's nose. That wasn't all. When Odin opened his mouth to answer her question, his mouth was filled with blood that had flowed back from his torn and ruptured internal organs. I must endure as long as I can. The king of Asgard had the ability to withstand the shock inflicted within the range of his influence. Most of it was greatly offset and returned, but even for Odin, it was impossible to withstand the constant shock indefinitely. Surely not. Clack, screech. Realizing this belatedly, Brunhild hurriedly removed the golden armor Odin was wearing and tore open the cloth beneath it. When his bare back was revealed, her worst fears were confirmed. Whoosh, whoosh, screech. Odin's entire body was covered in magic circles. And those magic formulas were all about mitigating shock and restoring his body. Since the beginning of this battle, Odin had been wearing these things on his body. You don't have to go to such lengths. The magic circles were flickering dangerously. It was nothing compared to Odin's vitality. Am I special? There are more than a few people dying at this very moment. There is no set weight to a human life. From that perspective, it wasn't a wrong statement. But Brunhild couldn't agree with those words. Odin. Odin. Heracles' vision turned black as he lifted his head. He was severely injured by the giant's attack, and he fights while recalling his past of slaughtering giants. He learns that Zeus and Ares killed his mother, and realizes that his power was created from the blood of giants. Heracles, who holds the title of the giant-slaying hero of Gigantomachy, now fights with a sense of guilt for slaughtering giants, and is ready to fight without sparing his own life. Who was he? He was the greatest king in this tower, a being who ruled a vast country spanning 5 floors. Furthermore, he was now the leader of this battlefield. Groan. Brunhild couldn't bring herself to tell Odin to stop. The myth, king of Asgard, who was influencing this battlefield, wasn't just replacing the damage of his allies. Odin. It was proof that the great king was present on this battlefield and was standing firm. However, if Odin's death were to be known, Raphael, Uriel, the battlefield would collapse in an instant. Brunhild hurriedly called out to the archangels of heaven. She didn't think she could save him right now. But even 1%, or 1/10,000th. She had to delay his death as much as possible. King of Asgard is commanding the battlefield. Odin's name must not be erased from this battlefield. For that, Raphael and Uriel came rushing in. Please heal him. At Brunhild's request, the 2 archangels stood next to Odin. Receiving their treatment, Odin slowly took a breath. This treatment was only delaying death. Nevertheless, he didn't refuse treatment because he also knew how much his presence was needed on the battlefield. How long can you endure? Breathing roughly, Odin listened to the sound of thunder in the distance. Heracles. Kwa rung. Kwang. Heracles' outstretched fist struck the giant's jaw. The giant's huge body was lifted into the air for a moment. The giant, who had struggled to get up from its spot, staggered once more. Yushin. The sensation he felt from his fist was unusual. He had hit it so hard that his fist was starting to hurt. Swish. As he was hitting the giant's body like that, something grabbed Heracles' leg. A fairly strong grip. Heracles' rampant movements stopped, and his body flew up as if grabbed by the force. Bu Wang. Kwagwagwagwa quack. Heracles' flying body flipped the ground. Heracles stuck one fist into the ground while flying, and quickly regained his center. Who's doing this again? Lifting his head, Heracles' vision turned black. Before he could even speak, it was already flying towards Heracles. Boong, quang, a shock that created a huge crater. Crunch, crackle. Fortunately, Heracles was able to quickly transform his body into lightning and escape from that spot. Soon, Heracles identified the outer existence that had attacked him. It had a body so large that it could be mistaken for a giant, but it was not a giant. Giant Slayer senses great confusion from the opponent. Giant Slayer does not respond. It was a headless guy, just like the undead monster, Durahan. Its body was so swollen with flesh that it was hard to believe how it moved so quickly. Its 2 hands had strange mouths with sharp teeth. It seemed that blood was flowing from his calf. It seemed that he had been bitten by the teeth on that hand. Distortion of an intelligent being. Heracles, who could now see the name, felt goosebumps. Heracles, who checked the guy's name, muttered with a tired face. He looks exactly like his name. He has no head and a mouth on his hand. Everything is distorted. The momentum he felt was not something to be taken lightly. I'm getting tired. My body is starting to get sore. Not only is my magical power starting to run out, but I'm also reaching my physical limits. Nevertheless, I have no choice. Crackle. Lightning wrapped around his hand. Several bolts of lightning shot out of Heracles' hand. Kwa rang, Kwa wang. The distortion of the intelligent being dodged the lightning bolts that Heracles had fired. That fat body has this kind of mobility. This is cheating. Before he could finish speaking, Heracles swung the lightning power through the club in his hand. Kwa rang, Heracles, club and the distortion of the intelligent being collided. Compared to its size, the guy was too fast. Its strength was also considerable, and Heracles, who was physically exhausted, was pushed back several times. Thud, thud, thud. Ku-geuk. Just then, as Heracles was being pushed back little by little. Ku-gu-gu-gu. A shadow loomed over the two of them. The foot of a giant. As it trampled on Heracles. Boom, snap, Heracles was embedded in the ground. For a moment, it felt as if every bone in his body had been pulverized, but Heracles forced his body up. The giant's strength fills your legs. Crackle, sizzle. His legs swelled up. Gritting his teeth as he heaved himself up, Heracles muttered. Of all the things I had to fight, it just had to be these guys. A hollow laugh escaped his lips. Why did he always have to fight such large creatures? Are you Heracles? Long ago, when the Gigantomachy was in full swing, he recalled the time he had faced the Gigantes. At that time, Heracles' stock was on the rise. He was blinded by something, and he swept through the battlefield like a madman, slaughtering the giants. Am I supposed to know you, Lord Gigantes? Thinking back on it, it seemed to have started around that time. The time when he began to waver. Thud, one of the 4 Gigantes. He came to Heracles and knelt down. I have heard that you are normally mild-mannered. The complete opposite of Zeus, they say. What's your point? I understand that you have a personal grudge against us giants. He didn't seem to have any intention of fighting. As a Gigante, he was a being that rivaled the 3 gods of Olympus. It was an unbelievable sight to see such a Gigante kneeling down on his own. Beat me as much as you want until your anger subsides. If you wish to kill me, then so be it. But in return, please do not persecute us any further. That's useless. You might as well stand up and fight. No, this is our best course of action. He hesitated for a moment. Was it really the right thing to kill the being before him? After standing there for several minutes, Heracles took the Gigante's life on the spot. That day, the 4 Gigantes were reduced to 3. You have acquired the title, Giant Slayer. It was around that time that he received the title of Giant Slayer and began to be called by that title. However, Heracles' slaughter gradually slowed down from that point on. Every time he swung his fist at the giants, an unpleasant feeling built up inside him, and his chest burned even hotter due to the conflict between his anger and his guilt. And when he learned that the death of his mother, Alcmene, was caused by Zeus and Ares, Heracles vowed before another Gigantes. He would give up this worthless life if he had to. And if that was not enough, he would somehow correct what was wrong. He would spend the rest of his time doing that. So you're saying that the guy who caused Gigantomachia was that bastard? One day, the truth that was revealed by Wu Wan. Wu Wan told Heracles, who was suffering from the memory of Gigantomachia, that Gigantomachia was one of the foolish and chaotic plans to annihilate the giants. But it was your father who carried it out. Wu Wan did not deny Heracles' words. Zeus was the one who carried out Gigantomachia, but it was the foolish chaos who first established the plan. He moved for this day. Gigantomachia, Ragnarok, Qianmado War. Millions or hundreds of millions of lives have died for this day. I have a long life to live. Thinking about it, it was only a few years ago. I used to run to kill giants with fire in my eyes. The man who used to be that way is now fighting with that sense of responsibility on his back. I should have died there that day anyway. The day he learned the whole truth and stood before the Gigantes with Wu Wan. The memory of that day when he was determined to die still weighs heavily on Heracles' shoulders. Giant Slayer confronts the highest giant. Giant Slayer recognizes the distortion of intelligent beings as giants. And this title continued to remind him of that determination. My body and myths are made from their blood anyway. Hero of Gigantomachia, continues the myth. Both the Giant Slayer and the hero of Gigantomachia. And even the skill that represents Heracles, gigantification. They were all powers built up through the blood of the giants. So, as long as that power flows through his body, I don't care if it ends here. Heracles had no intention of fighting to spare his life. Chapter 519, Crack. He clenched his teeth so hard that they shattered and rolled around in his mouth. Rumble. The giant's leg lifted into the air. He lifted the giant with one hand and swung his club at it. Bang, clang. The giant's foot burst like a balloon. As the screaming giant staggered, the distortion of an intelligent being rushed towards Hercules. He swung his club to strike down the approaching creature. Grow, Ruyi Jingu Bang. Clang, a giant Ruyi Jingu Bang extended from the sky and blocked the distortion of the intelligent being in Hercules. Quote. Hercules looked up with a puzzled expression. This was clearly Sun Wukong's Ruyi Jingu Bang. But why was it blocking him? Hercules looked in the direction the Ruyi Jingu Bang had come from, and Sun Wukong's foot entered his field of vision. Bam! Sun Wukong's foot kicked Hercules in the face. Hercules staggered backward and fell on his butt. He let out a hollow laugh. What? Swish! Sun Wukong grabbed Hercules by the collar. What do you think you're doing? He growled. Sun Wukong knew what Hercules was thinking better than anyone. Do you want to die? No, I want to live. Then why? I don't want to die, but I'm fighting to the death. Just like you. Hercules' answer made Sun Wukong's eyes flicker. Just a few minutes ago, he had been fighting with half his mind gone. He was so exhausted that he had lost his reason to the power of the demon and had even attacked Pandora for a moment. And of course, Hercules, who had returned with Pandora, knew about Sun Wukong's condition. Did you fail over there? Smack! Hercules shook off Sun Wukong's hand, which was holding his collar. Even if someone dies, someone has to survive. That's what it means to win. Thud! Hercules started moving again. He had already sweated so much that his whole body was cold. The muscles that had been inflated like balloons had shrunk a little as if the air had been let out. Nevertheless, Hercules did not stop. TCH, stubborn. Sun Wukong had no intention of backing down either. I guess. In the end, Sun Wukong muttered as he raised the Ruyi Jingu Bang. You're not wrong. Before the fight began, Odin had only one goal. It was to never retreat. The moment this place, where most of the tower's rankers were gathered, was breached, the incomprehensible beings would instantly take the lives of hundreds of millions of people. However, the situation was getting worse and worse. Zodiac Guild, retreat. Assassination Squad Guild, Azure Dragon and White Tiger Warriors. Requesting support. Several large guilds had taken critical hits. Armageddon annihilated. Asgard, the realm of the gods, was on the brink of collapse. The forces of evil, led by the giant Surtur, had invaded Asgard and were laying waste to everything in their path. The gods were fighting back valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. In the midst of the chaos, Odin, the All-Father of the gods, lay dying. He had been gravely wounded in battle, and his strength was failing. As Odin lay there, he knew that he could not allow Asgard to fall. He had to find a way to defeat Surtur and his forces. Suddenly, Odin had a vision. He saw a future where Asgard was victorious, and he saw himself leading the gods to victory. Odin knew that this vision was his destiny, and he was determined to make it a reality. Odin gathered his remaining strength and rose to his feet. He called upon his divine powers and summoned his most powerful weapon, Gungnir. With Gungnir in hand, Odin charged into battle. The gods were inspired by Odin's return, and they fought with renewed vigor. Together, they pushed back the forces of evil and drove them out of Asgard. Odin led the gods to victory, and Asgard was saved. In the aftermath of the battle, Odin was hailed as a hero. He had saved Asgard from destruction, and he had proven himself to be a true leader. Odin's legend would be told for generations to come, and he would be remembered as one of the greatest gods of all time. Odin thrusts the shaft of Gungnir, which he was holding in his hand, into the ground. Magical power spreads throughout the land, and a huge magic circle is carved on the ground. Puff, puff, puff. Thousands of spears rise from the ground. The spears are all directed at the Outers, not the allies. In an instant, the bodies of the Outers, who have become like porcupines, sag, and Odin throws his body between them. The two arms holding the spear swell up. The spear, which he swung with all his might, filled with magical power, pierces the huge whale flying in the sky. Bang! The whale with a hole in its body falls to the ground. Odin stands in the sky and rolls his eyes towards his next target. I wanted to throw the spear rather than swing it like this, but I couldn't bring myself to activate Gungnir. Because this one shot was the last. I had to take at least one more with me before I threw this. Quirung, Kwang, Odin's spear danced. His body, which had become like a rag, moved more lightly than ever before. I always think about death. It was something Mimir had said one day when he woke up and looked out the window. Odin, how do you want to die? Not how do you want to live, but how do you want to die? I thought it was a ridiculous question. Of course. When it comes to this kind of question, it's usually about what kind of life you want to live. Quat, the tip of Gingnir's spear splits the body of another outer in half. My heart burned as if it was going to burst, and my breath came up to my chin. Anyone can live, but not everyone can decide the moment of their death. Decide the moment of your own death. It's not a very pleasant thing to do. I think differently, Odin. It's just as important as how you live. Maybe that moment is the meaning of our existence. Sususis. As Odin rolled his eyes in search of his next enemy, he sensed a stealthy presence approaching from behind. Boong. At the same time as he turned his body around, Odin swung his fist. No, I was going to swing it. Mimir, if only the being in front of me wasn't Mimir. Bang, quote, exclamation mark quote. My eyes widen as if they are about to tear. My vision blurred with the shock I felt in my stomach. The being that had definitely looked like Mimir just a moment ago had suddenly turned into a single-celled human form. The tentacles that had stabbed me in the back pierced my stomach and penetrated my body, and blood gushed out of my mouth. Group. The tentacles that had pierced my body lifted Odin up. Odin's body, which had flown into the middle of the battlefield, crashed to the ground. Kwang, Kulak, phew, laughter came out with a cough. I can't believe I fell for this obvious thing. I knew Mimir was dead. Nevertheless, what shook me was my own weak heart that couldn't bring itself to attack him. Ha, ha ha ha. Half of his torso was blown away, but Odin did not despair. Rather, he felt much more refreshed. At this moment, he clearly realized it. You're asking a question that's not so difficult for you to answer. Did you already think about it? Yeah, the day Mimir asked about the moment of his death. Odin was able to answer without hesitation. I want to die as a warrior. Click, click, click. The user's mana is insufficient. The durability of Gingnir is rapidly decreasing. Gingnir, clutched in Odin's hand, began to start up. There wasn't much mana left. His stamina was also reaching its limit, and if his concentration wavered even a little, he would lose consciousness and collapse on the spot. Not as the king of Asgard. As a warrior, Odin's mana, and the mana inherent in Gingnir, combined to create a surge of intense magical energy. At the ominous flow of magic energy, the Outers' eyes turned to Odin. They had already become wary of Gingnir after several previous startups. However, Gingnir was not something that could be avoided or blocked just because it was wary. This is my quack, clenching his fist tightly. Last spear. Odin pulled his body like a bowstring. Soon, the moment the spear shot out of his hand, Gingnir starts up. Flash. Gingnir's light devoured everything. Tuaa. Everything caught in the pure white spear light disappeared. Gingnir was torn to shreds, and all the magic power contained within it was poured into a single blow. Waak. The purple clouds covering the sky disappeared, and in an instant, the clearest starlight shone on the ground. Beep. Tinnitus rang in Odin's ears as he gasped for breath. He could feel his body slowly tilting to the side. As time seemed to slow down, his vision, which had turned black and white, blurred. Thud. I want to burn out, doing my best on the most meaningful battlefield. He lay down on the cold ground, but a smile spread across his lips. At this moment of his death, he thought he could understand Mimir's feelings a little. Perhaps he had met the death he desired, just like himself. He was the same. Just one thing. The ringing in his ears gradually diminished. Then, naturally, the sound from outside came in. Odin. Ooh, King Odin has fallen. That's wrong. We can win. As he collapsed, the battlefield began to collapse rapidly. The last battle, fought as a warrior, not a king. I'm worried about what comes next. Step. That was when several feet approached Odin's bedside. In his blurred vision, Odin struggled to lift his head to identify the owner of the feet, and a familiar face appeared before his eyes. Was it a hallucination, or was he seeing things at the gates of death? The face of the man who was clearly known to be dead appeared. I should have hurried a little more. A man with long golden hair and an air of majesty all over his body. Another king of this tower. The ruler of Olympus. Zeus. He, who was known to have died in the foolish fight against chaos, approached Odin. No, it wasn't just him. I couldn't have hurried more than this. Well, it would have been more disastrous if we had come too soon in a hurry. We came at the right time. Heracles and Kali, and even Diva's Varuna and his son, Loki. Really, it was an unimaginable combination. What the hell happened? Thud. And among them, by far, there was an unbelievable face mixed in. Odin's eyes slowly moved up from the man's feet to his face. White hair and slightly deeper wrinkles. There were some slight differences, but he was definitely Quadruple A. Soon, Odin, who made eye contact with him, opened his mouth silently and burst into laughter. Mimir, I secretly regretted not knowing what he had prepared for me, even at the cost of his own life. Now I think I know what he had prepared. Was that it? His blurred vision did not return. The head he had lifted with difficulty slowly fell down. Now, it was really time to rest. Because the perfect substitute has just arrived. I envy you. Swish. So saying, the man reached out and closed the eyes of the transparently dead Odin. With a complicated expression, he smiled and looked at Odin with his eyes closed and continued. You didn't run away from this place. Unlike me. He had the same face as Odin. You did well. You didn't run away and held this battlefield until we came. Wow. A group of pure white light enveloped the battlefield. Wondering what was going on, the rankers who were engrossed in the fight looked around. Click. A small ticking sound came to their ears. Click, 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 click. The ticking sound gradually increased. And at the end of the sound, time went into reverse. Wow. Numerous clock springs were intricately intertwined and tangled in the light group. The time that had been disturbed was shaken without fail by some force and created a straight path. They crossed the time that had unfolded and turned upside down. Hercules, Kali, Loki and Varuna, Helios and Persephone, the Dragon King, Chernobog. And Odin. Numerous rankers with the same names and faces as those living in the present appeared on the battlefield. Thud. Odin's spear shook the ground. Their presence was newly imprinted on this land. Now, as if taking the place of the dead Odin, the king of Asgard takes command of the battlefield. He who came from the future began to exert his divine power. We will fight, from the present to the future. It was the moment when the baton was passed. Chapter 520. It was around the time when Zeus had just arrived in the future. Mimir, who had woken up from his long sleep, gathered all his colleagues. We have confirmed everything. Having said that, Mimir turned his head towards Zeus. Their gazes naturally turned towards Zeus. He was the only one who had come from the past to the future. What do you mean by confirmation? Zeus asked to understand the situation. As Mimir said, the fact that Yu-Won and Sun Wukong had gone to the past, and even the fact that he had come here, was all work for a certain confirmation. Kronos was sacrificed in the first attempt. Clockwork. The item that sent Yu-Won to the past. Kronos sacrificed himself to create and successfully operate that item. The next one was you. I thought that if I could go from this side, I could also come from that side. You succeeded. Yes, you are the proof. Mimir spread out 2 fingers. 2 experiments were made because of you. Moving from the past to the future. And the existence of the path, created as the first attempt. Path, what is that? Bewildered expressions. It seemed that only Mimir and Odin used the correct terms. Time and magic, they were the most knowledgeable in those 2 fields of study. When Kronos first created the clockwork to send someone to the past, what was needed was connection. To explain, Mimir moved his hand and drew 2 circles in the air. A line was drawn between the circles as Mimir gestured. The 2 separated worlds were connected like that. 2 worlds running on parallel lines. Connecting 2 worlds that could never meet was the most difficult task. Kronos was the first to succeed in that most difficult task. There was no one like him in the field of time. Kronos was originally a ranker who had the ability to freely manipulate time. The first attempt was a success. The second attempt was to see if we could come from the other side to this side. Get to the point. So, is it possible? Mimir shook his head at Heracles' question. It's impossible on this side. If it's on this side, that means it's possible on the other side. And I exist on that side, too. Mimir believed in himself. He said that if it were his past self, he would definitely think the same way. A path that has already been connected can be widened. As Mimir waved his hand, the line connecting the 2 circles thickened. The more the path widens, the less the cost for it. First Kronos, then my eye, and then my past eye. Do you mean that you have to keep paying the price? Heracles' gaze turned to Odin. Odin nodded at the gaze that asked if he knew. Odin was the one who had crossed over after persuading Mimir for a long time. Mimir, who wore an eye patch over one eye, sacrificed one of his eyes to send Sun Wukong. It's work to widen the path. To go back and forth between 2 world lines running on parallel lines that can never meet, you have no choice but to constantly pave the way. So, who's going to cross over next? Why are you asking the obvious? Yu-Won went, and Sun Wukong went, so it's Heracles' turn. Yu-Won, Sun Wukong, and Heracles. The 3 of them were candidates who had been mentioned since the clockwork was first created. 2 of them had already crossed over to the past. Now, only one remained, Heracles. However, it won't be enough to win with just 1 or 2. Zeus shook his head, saying that it was impossible to the extent of being ridiculous. At the last moment, Zeus poured everything he had into the fight against the foolish chaos. Nevertheless, Zeus failed to kill the foolish chaos. No matter how many more beings were lurking behind them, it was clear that the situation would not change much just because Heracles joined. I don't know that, but you. Mimir nodded at the sign that more explanation was needed. That's right, 1 or 2 won't be enough. Then how many are going? At Zeus' question, Mimir looked around with his remaining eye. All the colleagues who had survived in this world were gathered in one place. If only a few people were going to move, they wouldn't have bothered to gather. All of us. Everyone. Wham! Sun Ogong held on, gripping his Rui Jingu Bang. His clothes were in tatters and his stamina was at rock bottom, but a silly laugh escaped him nonetheless. He. The sight of his comrades who had appeared before his eyes was reflected in them. A cluster of white light. And the sound of the second hand he had heard just a moment ago. It was definitely the same phenomenon that Sun Ogong had experienced when he had crossed over to the past. What the hell happened? Hercules, who had been kneeling and half collapsed, grabbed his club and rose from his spot. Numerous rankers who had suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Where the hell had they come from? What do you mean, what? Sun Ogong still giggled. He was just about to answer Hercules' question when. Crack, lightning struck from the sky. Thud, a heavy sound rang out as a giant man with green hair revealed himself. And that became Sun Ogong's answer. Oh, shit. Me. Hercules faced Hercules. He seemed to have shoulders that were a handspan broader than his own. His face was the same, but there were a few more scars on his body, and one of his arms had been cut off. However, Hercules could confirm one thing through his body. This must be how others feel when they look at me. Hercules possessed the strongest physique in the tower. As such, he had never felt awe looking at someone's physique before. But who would have thought that he would feel that way towards himself? It feels like I'm looking in a mirror. The future Hercules muttered as he looked at his past self. Then, he looked back at Sun Ogong, who was standing with his Rui Jingu Bang as his cane and his legs trembling. Are you okay? You look like you're struggling. What did you do? Mimir over there sent a signal. We all crossed over together in response to that signal. Thanks to his sacrifice, we were able to cross over too. Quote. A question mark floated above Sun Ogong's expression. He seemed to be reacting as if he didn't understand what was going on. Hercules eventually gave up explaining. Do you think you'll understand if I explain it in more detail? Yeah, Sun Ogong nodded. He knew that his head wasn't that great, so he figured that he wouldn't be able to understand everything that was happening before his eyes right now. So instead of asking for more details, Sun Ogong asked just one question that he was most curious about. Did you cross over completely? Probably not. Probably. They said it'll be half a day at most. Instead of all of us crossing over, the time we can spend here is that short. Whoosh. Bang. As the future Hercules extended his fist, the distortion of the intelligent beings who were rushing in flew far away. Electricity surged through his fist. Sun Ogong's eyes widened at that power, and he asked. You can do that too. The future Hercules had definitely never used something like lightning before. So it was no wonder that he was surprised when Hercules suddenly shot electricity out of his fist. I received it from Zeus, who crossed over to our side. It took some time to get used to it. What the hell are you talking about? It's something like that. Seeming to give up on explaining, Hercules sighed and shook his head. Thinking about it, they had been the ones who had colluded and lied about Zeus being alive. There was no way they could explain it all now when there was no time. Yeah, I guess it doesn't matter. Sun Ogong calmed his trembling legs and raised his Rui Jingu Bang, which he had been using as a cane. Thanks to that, I was able to catch my breath. What about Kim Yu-won? Is he not here? That punk went over the wall. The answer came not from Sun Ogong, but from the current Hercules. Hercules, who was facing his past self with both arms intact, raised an eyebrow and asked. Over the wall? Don't tell me, to where I'm thinking. He's probably fighting Yog-Sothoth right about now. With Yog-Sothoth, it was getting more and more unbelievable the more he heard. Yog-Sothoth was the guy they had ultimately failed to conquer. But that guy was being fought by Yu-won alone, and over the wall at that. He had no idea what had happened to Yu-won, who had arrived first. He glanced at Sun Ogong, needing an explanation, but he shrugged and made a mischievous expression. If I explain it to you, will you understand? Quote. Hercules kept his mouth shut. He had just been given the same words that he had spoken a moment ago. It was equally difficult for them to fully understand each other's situations. Sun Ogong burst into a fit of laughter at Hercules' reaction, who had become speechless after eating honey. Don't try to understand. Let's leave that guy to that guy. Waruk, Hua and Jiamjung flared up in Sun Ogong's eyes once more. Then, from now on, and at the same time, Pung, Pupapupung. Above Sun Ogong's head, numerous clones appeared, performing somersaults. The counterattack begins. Countless stars poured down from the desert. Yog-Sothoth's name, Sky of the World, created countless stars and moved them as if they were part of itself. Shuaa, the chaos covering the ground devoured the stars. It then flew towards the purple nebula that was covering the sky. To be exact, it was flying towards Nyarlathotep at its center. Sutsuatsu, the purple haze covering the sky moved to counter Yog-Sothoth's chaos. An empty void, and the name of foolish chaos swallowed the formless chaos in reverse. It seems that you are quite used to using the name. The chaos that had no form moved at Yuan's will. I guess you thought of that name as yours a long time ago. The chaos grew in size and transformed into the shape of a giant wolf with teeth. Unnamed greatness, one of the names Nyarlathotep had. A giant wolf made of chaos devoured the sky. Like a giant creature devouring the sun, it began to cover the countless stars in the sky. Then, I only thought about today. Puwaik, the great chaos that covered the sky met the purple energy and became entangled. Pong, the two names met and scattered in the sky. Yuan threw his body into the cluster of lights that shone like the dust of jewels and fell down. Chi-ji-ji-ji-ji. Dozens of lightning bolts appeared around Yuan. Kuruer, the lightning turned black, and the two attributes mixed together. And wearing dozens of lightning bolts created in that way. Waruk, Hua and Jiamjung reveals the entity of Nyarlathotep. Sensory zone is activated. Yuan found Nyarlathotep in the midst of the chaotic chaos. Quowing, a baptism of lightning bolts shot towards one point. Immediately afterward, the tip of the sword held in Yuan's hand cut Nyarlathotep's waist. Skriak, as Nyarlathotep's waist was cut, a long line was drawn across the sky. The stars that were cut by the sword fell down to the ground, but the result was not very satisfactory. It seems that you don't have a real body anymore. I am the world now. You know that, don't you? Yes, I do. What Nyarlathotep wanted to be. It was not like Yog-Sothoth, who wanted to become Azathoth vaguely. One and all in one. The totality of the names that Yog-Sothoth had. Nyarlathotep had always coveted those names. In a word, the world. Yes, goo. The desert shook, and the sky began to crack. Unless this world is destroyed, I will not die even if I am cut, torn, or burned. The sky howled, I will not abandon this world like you. In those words, Yuan saw a little child. He now understood a little why he had turned his back on Azathoth. And unlike Yog-Sothoth, he didn't just look up to Azathoth. It seems that you still haven't escaped from that starving child.